best possible guess. I look at it like a chemistry set. I know all these people. I know who goes well together and how to mix it. Tonight's two guest panel is one of the greatest comedians of all time, and also a guy who's returning back into the comedy business after a very long hiatus. So, what a perfect panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you two of the greats. Make some fucking noise for Jim Norton and Tony Caruso. Jim Norton! Tony Caruso! First time on Tony. Wow. Tony Caruso. Jim Norton. Welcome. Norton is back, the only comedian to be on both Madison Square Garden episodes, absolutely crushing, one of our favorite guests of all time. He's been on this show in LA, multiple times in Austin, in Las Vegas. Jim Norton, one of the best comedians in the world. Jim Norton can't see you. He's
right now they're all about 70%. Right now they're about 70%, but I need traction to keep going forward, and I'll find the time ultimately to fill in the remaining 30% as well. It's not a right or a wrong mahalik in life. It depends on what's happening. So again, the goal was I was supposed to be knocked out of finish. So come in, cut it down, knock it down. But the goal over here is people. The goal over here is to conquer the land. Destroying Avodah, especially this farm of Avodah, is taking a lot of time. Go as it says. Remember again, people can feel it takes 14 years. So first go ahead and conquer the land, knock down Avodah as you're going through it, conquer it, then go back and destroy it. So it's goes like this. So you start circling the dealers. Kind of see. You pass them to Chosam. So what's the answer? Now again, still same concept. As the Yossi says, you shall go and destroy them as they So actually, the customer was actually just reading the customer will deconstruct. In Pakistan, you will deconstruct their materials, and leave it. Yeshibad Matsevosam, break their Matsevos, and leave it. What do you mean? So you're like, supposed to burn it. Rather again, says, the dope, the Akakach, Suro. Right? They're saying, so the dope is pursue and then burn. The idea being, let's say, that there was a mandate here to conquer the land. So because of the mandate ultimately to conquer the land, therefore, again, the obligation was knock the Avodah Zarah out of commission, destroy the stones, deconstruct the Mizbechos, but then move forward. Don't take the time ultimately to burn it now. So Rabbanon, Haini by Leila, okay, Avodah Zarah, so it's not the Shalish Akarel. So it's like Rabbanon ultimately use this responsibility that when you uproot Avodah Zarah, it's not just enough to destroy the object. It's not the Shalish Akarel. What's the Shalish Akarel is you have to make sure to remove any vestige of the idolatry. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi, you know the Shalish Akarel Menovet, where the Yossi we can learn that you have to go ahead and uproot the Avodah Zarah afterwards. Not Saleh, if you Barakan as Shema Min HaMakom. Ultimately, you learn from the phrase that you shall destroy their name from this place. The idea being that it's not just enough to destroy the idols, it's not just enough to destroy the death, but rather they want us to actively uproot all of the Avodah Zarah. Listen, which again is an incredible yesod as well. Because it teaches you, in general, you have this need those answers. Negative disease. So this is an incredible yesod. Somebody check this card, by the way. So I just want to point out. So in this yesod, incredible Musar Hashkafa. Which is also the same way I hold the Zara, that it's not just enough to stop worshiping it or to destroy the Mizbeach, or to go in and destroy the idol, but rather again, one of the starts was Shari Shachara. Most of the world of negative needles also. You don't have negative needles, those laberos, those things. Not just enough to stop the negative challenges, the negative behavior, but start with Shari Shachara. Plus, every behavior is rooted in something. Everything negative is rooted in something. It's not just enough to stop the behavior, but a person starts with Shari Shachara. A person has to go ahead and ultimately again find the church part and put it. So listen to his Koach of Purim is very well known. Perhaps even the most quoted piece of Torah that comes ultimately again through the Yom Tov of Purim is a statement given to Purim Zohar. The Purim Zohar says that Purim is Yom Tov. There's a power of Tshuva today. There's a power ultimately again of the ability to change. There's a power of the ability to go ahead and transform ourselves into something dramatic, something amazing, something something dramatically amazing. So Purim offers us this incredible and dramatically amazing opportunity for cathartic, comprehensive change. You know, it's like Shaila is what is something about college Rebbe says something absolutely amazing. And he explains that on Purim is an amazing halacha. The halacha is that Kolaposhet Yad knows him. That we know that halacha is a normal circumstance. If somebody comes to collect their credentials, thank you. And Purim, the halacha is Kolaposhet Yad knows him. If a Jew asks, the money you give them, how much you give them, that's up to your discretion. But on Purim, you have to give. That's the halacha. Kolaposhet Yad knows him. Also actually seen this. So the Zohar also writes that the same way that you observe halacha here, so the Rothschild observes halacha in Shemayim. You know, if someone extends their hand to give them, so Shemayim is the same exact halacha. Whoever extends the hand, in Rothschild about something that is a pressure to hand, whoever extends their hand to the Ribono Shel Olam knows. Today, every other day of the year, even Yom Kippur, every other day of the year, so I extend my hands up and it's powerful. I have to earn that extension, so to speak. I have to come up with something. The greatness of Purim is the same way that if another Jew asks me for something, no question asked. I give. So today, when I extend my pocket to hand, when I extend my hand, I'm sure that goes on in the system of social real he said, this is alluded to me in the village. So, what do we say? Actually, see that. This is in Shoshanas Yaakov. What do we say in Shoshanas Yaakov? Gam Harvona Zachor Leto. Even if someone is a Harvona, we'll say, what's Harvona? Harvona is a mushroom, the short Chara of destroying. Even if someone is broken, even if someone is shipwrecked, even if someone is spiritually compromised, Gam Harvona Zachor Leto. Today is the day of Kara Pushik Yadno. Today is the day where we extend our hands like a spark. There is no telling how we can do it. But I know it sounds strange because Purim, you often don't think of Purim as a day of Aliyah. You don't think of Purim ultimately as a day of spiritual growth because there's so much Simcha, and the Simcha itself is a little bit like a little hololus, sometimes a little bit of silliness, which is good. That's part of the nature of the day. Amplified the idea of Simcha. And we're running around in this Rahmanos, and all beautiful. So this thing seems like the day of incredible contemplation. The book is what it is. But it is. So you have to make sure that you are not on today. Just give our conscious hand, just extend the hands up and I know I'm not always here. I know I'm not always connected. I know I'm not always doing the right thing. I'm doing it. I have my good days, I have my bad days, I have my valleys. Today's Purim, I'm here. Today's Purim, I'm going to have Kabbalah during my tefillos. Today's Purim, I'm going to daven for others. Today's Purim, I'm going to daven for myself. Today's Purim, ultimately, I'm going to try to figure out how to be energized and how to be connected after this Purim. And the great promise we have is called Hachis Yad. All we need to do is extend our hands up to the Baruch Hu do so, no sleep. Wieso verliert das schon die Medizin? Wieso verliert alles war nicht bei Transfusionen? Wieso verliert das schon die Medizin? After the medicine for models, if you make it a good feeling ultimately to ourselves by taking this time, ultimately we're not rushing off to work as quickly as we have to go at all, only a little bit more time to gap and a little bit more time to think, a little bit of time just to focus on our Avodas Hashem, to give to ourselves a little bit. And our looking at most of our hopefully we have discussed shower upon us, call showers within you and give us and sustain us. Just like did you make a serious move on him, or did you like joking away? Joking. I think it was it was like a beautiful document. So let's begin. Then hey, sorry. So though we're not going to begin by quoting the Rebbe, this quote will begin by quoting the Mishnah. So let's begin. So Hanachim Ha'okim Esahar. So let's remember again, let's begin. So we're speaking still in the topic of Avodah Zarah, specifically again at what could be rendered Avodah Zarah. So Hanachim Ha'okim Esahar. So if you have nothing, you sent out to worship a mountain, Vesakvos, or the hills. In Torin Umash She'alei Rasul. So we're going to learn, so inanimate objects that will actually will define the scope of this. The thought purpose is right now, both the mountains, nor the mountains, nor the hills can be made into Avodah Zarah. So that which is on the mountain or that which is on the hill can be made into Avodah Zarah, but the mountain or the hill itself cannot. As the Pasuk says, "Osachmot kesef v'zohav alei." The Pasuk says, "You shall not go ahead." Literally, you shall not go ahead and covet. You shall not go ahead and worship Kesef and Zohar, the gold and the silver which is upon them. We see over here that it's only that which is upon the mountain or the hill, not the mountain or the hill itself, which is problematic, which can become a holy Zohar. So the Gemara says, Elohim al Ha'arim. So say the Yoshi quotes the same pasuk just a different phrase. The pasuk says, "Abed Kadun is called the Moshe Sha'abi Shalavayim Sha'abi Yoshim Osam as Elohim al Ha'arim." Go ahead and destroy your gods on the mountains. So the murder of Yosef Yigashin Elohim al Ha'arim, Elohim Elohim. That it's only your God on the mountains, but the mountains themselves cannot become the gods. Elohim ala Gvos, you're not allowed to worship the gods which are on the hills. Gvos Elohim, but the hills themselves cannot become the gods. So at first glance, it appears as if Yosef will be saying the same exact thing as the Tanakh. Right? There is no difference between the two. The right? So they're both saying the same thing, which is that the mountains, the hills cannot become Avodah Zarah. That which is on the mountains, that which is on the hills can, but the mountains and hills themselves cannot. You seem to be dashing it from different places. The Tanakh says, "Osachmos kesef v'zohav aleihem." Ultimately, the Tanakh says, "Do not covet the gold and silver that is on them," which indicates to us that it is not the mountain or the hill which could become awesome, but rather only that which is upon them. And Rabbi Yosef really says, "Elohim Elohim," and again, that's Elohim Elohim. But ultimately, the bottom line being the same, that it's only that which is on the mountain which becomes Pasuk Avodah Zarah, not the mountain. As the Gemara, as the Mishnah Kasha, so it says, what about Asherah? What about Asherah? This poses an existential difficulty for us, right? What about the Asherah? So the Asherah, let's remember again, is something that by definition is part of the mixture of the landscape. By definition is part of the earth. Yet again, you see it is Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, using what we just learned before, of Rosat either Aleihem or Elohim 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 Elohim, why would that say that the answer? So here we go. It means Sheyesh, but Yisas Yad. Because I will say, literally translated, it has Tisas Yad Adam literally means that they say it has man's fingerprint on it. The idea is that this item has man's involvement. Rashi says, what does it mean, man's involvement? Sha'adam Yachol. A person planted it. So we'll say, because a person planted it, this is considered to be something created by man. Because it's something created by man, therefore, by definition, it is subject ultimately to being transformed into Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, in other words, what the Mishnah simply saying is as follows: anything that is naturally formed in this world, by definition, cannot be transformed into a substance, an object of Avodah Zarah, even if it is worship. So therefore, even if I worship the mountain doesn't become Avodah Zarah. The hill doesn't become Avodah Zarah. I, using that logic, and Asherah, right, so also which is a tree, which people pray to, which people worship, shouldn't become Avodah Zarah either. Elamai tree is by Avodah Zarah, because the tree was planted by man. The tree was planted by man. Since the tree was planted by man, this is what the Mishnah calls when they use what Tisas became an Adam. The person was involved in this. Therefore, this item can be transformed into an object of Avodah Zarah. The Rosh use what Tisas became Adam also. And I will say, whatever ultimately has Tisas became Adam, whatever was created at least in part by man, obviously the tree is totality is not created by man. It grows on its own. But the license, the origin of that tree is something that is done by man. Therefore, by definition, it can be transformed into Avodah Zarah. I'm going to be a keeper. Rabbi Akiva said as follows: Ani oben ba'odon lebanah. Rabbi Akiva says, I'm going to dash. And actually says over here, Rabbi Akiva, Ani oben ba'odon lebanah. As far as ba'odon lebanah, so Rabbi Akiva says, I'm going to teach you how to dash in this process properly. How do you dash in the process properly? Komakri sha'ata mosi ha'gavoa v'giva nisa ve'itz la'anot da she'ish sham avodas kofa. So say that the Akiva understands over here as follows. And in fact, the speaking that we mentioned before, are in fact going ahead and giving us the markers as to where to find Avodah Zarah. Also, what is that mean? The pasuk reads, destroy all of the places where the Gentiles went ahead and worshipped idolatry. So, this is the land that you are inheriting. As Elohim al Haharim Haran, their gods on the tall mountains, and underneath every every green tree. So that Yeshua comes along, and Yeshua says, you don't understand. Torah is not just telling you the obligation to describe what we are. How do we know that? Because it's simple. You the Torah tells you just coming to describe what we are, then what? Coffee line, what's happening back there? A lot of guys over there. So the Torah could have just said, describe what we are. Why do you have to get on the mountains on the hill over here? Why do you need that? As the Akiva says, the Torah is actually giving us geographic markers. So it's giving us like Avodah Zarah GPS, telling you that when you get into Canaan and you have to root out the Avodah Zarah, I'm going to tell you where to find the Avodah Zarah. The Avodah Zarah is on top of the mountains. The Avodah Zarah is on top of the trees. On top of the hills. The Avodah Zarah is often the big green trees. So therefore, again, the Akiva understands. So that the Akiva is not disagree with that which we mentioned before. I mean, it could be very well agreeing with the same institute, kind of common of the Yossi. Agree or not disagree. Everybody actually seems to be on the same page. The Lord says, it's a beautiful day for this Mishnah. It's the day of Achas, the day of Shalom. A Mishnah without Machlokes. A Mishnah without Machlokes. It doesn't get better than this. It's like a spiritual jackpot. It doesn't get better than this. Mishnah without Machlokes on the day of Achas. Already a people saying in addition to the halakhic ramification that you kind of come that Yosef really brought out of the pasuk, there's another piece which is the clarification identifying for us where to find that Avodah Zarah, where to find it out, where to find it, in order to root it out. But we'll say, so bottom line, what comes out from the Mishnah is as follows. leaving aside that the Yeshiva's Dasha, what comes after Mishnah is as follows. The halacha l'maisa, even if one worships a mountain or a hill, so one does not transform that object into an entity of Avodah Zarah. It is only if one worships that which is on the, by the way, because it is fun, so it's only if one worships that which is on the mountain, that which is on the hill, those objects become Avodah Zarah. A shira is different. A shira is the exception. Why? Remember this phrase is mishlish got to be because if the person the contract was involved in the planting of the tree, therefore by definition the person has the ability to transform the identity of the tree into a chefza of Avodah Zarah. What's the just as an aside? What's the reason about it? Why are they putting the Avodah Zarah on top of the mountain, top of the hills? Because they take that from us. Right? You have to from us. Remember again, it's halach one halach. Shul, right? It's like that saying usually the Avodah Zarah people are shul per se. But it's true, usually, but halach says, especially the highest place in the city. Historically, there often do not happen because of anti-Semitic persecution. Jews weren't allowed to do that. But in fact, the halach is the base Hashem is always supposed to be placed on the highest point in the particular city. That will be part of the concept for us as well. God says to Gemara that Yosef read behind the Tanakama. Oh, so the Gemara asks our Tanakama that Yosef read the Tanakama are saying the same thing. And Yosef both are saying you worship the mountain. You can't make the mountain into Avodah Zarah, but what? You can go ahead and take that which is on the mountain into Avodah Zarah. But I will say, no. We've been around the Talmud block a couple of times. So we know already that if the Mishnah is teaching then what? There is a machloket, and you argue about something. But the Mishnah is recorded on a comma and on Yosef, in fact, they're saying the same thing. Yosef read the Hayut on a comma, our Barachama, our Ishmael, Sipoi Harkia Hadi Kebenai. What's the interesting afternoon? The afternoon is such a difference between the two. And the machloket between the two is what happens if the mountain is covered in gold. Sipoi Harkia Hadi. Let's say the mountain itself is covered in gold. So the Shaila is, let's say that one worships the mountain. So what's the Shaila? Good. Excellent. So the Shaila is, what's the status of the covering? Right? So say, is the covering considered to be part of the mountain or not? Remember again, why a covering? Because a covering is different than, let's say, a statue sitting on top of it. A statue sitting on top of it is clearly a separate entity. However, again, the coating on the mountain itself, the Shaila is a part of the mountain, and therefore can't be transformed into Avodah Zarah, or is a separate entity, distinct entity which can't be transformed into Avodah Zarah. Tanakama Sabar, the Tanakama holds, Sipoi Har Eno Shahad. Tanakama holds that the covering of the mountain is not like the mountain, and therefore, and therefore, if you worship it, its mamish becomes Avodah Zarah. That Yosef really suffer, Sipoi Har Harim Shahad. Yosef really holds that no, covering of the mountain is mamish like what? Mamish like the mountain itself, and therefore, even if you worship it, the covering does not become usher. What's the security dash is the moment? Tanakama Sabar, Sipoi Har Eno Kahar Mishad. Losach Mo Kesef Halei. Kosher. So what's the Tanakama story is? First it says, Losach Mo Kesef Yisahov Halei. The Tanakama understands that person is going to cover even his things. Even if the Kesef and Zog is Halei, even if the Kesef and Zog literally covers the mountain, still nevertheless it is not considered to be considered to be like part of the mountain, and therefore again, not considered to be part of the mountain, separate than the mountain, and therefore becomes usher. As Yossi had Rashi, the Yossi Sabat Sipoi Hakad, the Yossi really holds that the covering of the mountain is like the mountain itself. Batal Agabe Har, still that the covering is batal to the mountain itself. The Chayban, the Harla Hamo, the scope of it, since the mountain can't be turned into a form of idolatry. Sipoi Nami Lobitsa. Therefore, the covering also does not become usher. The Aliyah Bukra Akasirik Elohim Yushin. Now, what's the Aliyah? The Alehem is not referring to covering, but the Alehem is referring to what? Is referring to the idols situated on top of the mountain. Whenever the Gemara suggests, although the Tanakama is saying the same thing, the fact that the part of the Machlokus is Sipoi Har. The mountain is covered in gold. What's the status of the gold? Tanakama holds that it's not like the mountain, therefore it's also the real Susan says it's bundled to the mountain, like the mountain, and therefore. Here's the summary. Yukuli Halma, Sifui Haki, no Kahar, if this whole thing in reality, everyone agrees that the covering of the mountain is not the way of the mountain. That was ultimately, remember, that's like the Tanakama, that Alehem, that's that the Shahab, Alehem comes to include not just a separate and distinct idol situation on top of the mountain, but rather what? But even a covering, a gold covering on top of the mountain as well. So what's the matter? This the halakha was the Elohim. The halakha is actually very interesting. The Ilan Shenatu Ulabasov of Du Kamet. We'll say what? What is it back over here? The issue is as follows. If you planted a tree, and you only began to worship it at some later time. We'll keep asking just a moment. You learned Shiratu. Shalom Hashem Asherahu. So I planted a tree, did not I? Somebody else, right? You planted a tree, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah. With myself up to, and ultimately again, it only begins to worship it later on. So let's remember, the kind of dedication that I should tree is the tree planted for Avodah Zarah, from the beginning. In this case over here, I'm going ahead and I'm planting the tree at any specific Kabbalah, and ultimately only beginning to worship it later on. So the Gemara says Tanakama Savar, so the Tanakama holds either. So let's say actually before we get started, because that's for just a moment. Ila Shinatu, Top Rashi, then A on the base 45 through first line. Ila Shinatu, Shivoli Shimashira, for myself up. Shaman the Tanakama, Dama Party with Rothschild, also the Tanakama who says, and now please take over with the Suati, Yotzi Bahem, Shinakubarik, or Haisa, Yurasala, Bodas Kopabo. The 8 several says therefore again, Tanakama will say that the it is planted not for the sake of Avodah Zarah initially. It's not a tree that the Rabbi comes Avodah Zarah. The tree that's just like a mountain. Right? That's what's the case of the mountain. The mountain was there, not for Avodah Zarah, was just there, and then subsequently worshipped. So Tanakama holds that a tree planted initially for regular purposes, street purposes, and then only later on worshipped is treated like a mountain. Therefore, again, it is Little Haisit Kaslavos Kama. These are actually so according to Tanakama, what is the Ashira which is also? So Shinatu Mitila Lekach, it's Isas Yad Adam Enoklo, Ela-Inti Mitila Shirabo Lekohabi. About Dr. Garin Sholoshim Ashira, Inti Isas Adam, oil that he shines on my Dai Rabo Lekohabi. Hayakum Ma'at Ilay Tachas for Israel, Velo Ishas. So also Tanakama's of the end. The mice of the tree is planted initially just for stunting purposes, and later on is worshipped as Avodah Zarah, so that tree cannot be transformed into a temple of Avodah Zarah. Why? Because he knows that at that point in time, that tree is like what? Is like a mountain oracle. What about Isas Yad Adam? What about the fact that a person was involved in it? Isas Yad Adam only plays a role when the tree is planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah. But if it was planted for absolute to stamp tree purposes, other arboreal intentions, we have that one. Right? So then again, when my son, that's not called Isas. The Adam bowl, and therefore you're both saying he's mutter. On the other hand, the tree Rashi, that Rashi came and choose us the whole world, so this is no sitting world. Rashi Russian really made right, and the other really comes along to say, even Shinatu Gary, that is the Choloshim Ashira, will have myself up to us to Dami Lahar. Someone said, oh, the list places, no. Even if you planted initially for just some reasons, and then only later on you go ahead and what? You worship it. That is not like the mountain or so. Why not? So Yesh was Isas is the husband. Because also listen when you sit
many of you people out there, you heard and sometimes also said, my money comes in swear that you'll never love again. Many moments people is nice. Many hearts and many fights come down when you don't put yourself and go out at it again. And I'm vain and do you say, no, so I won't get away with it. Give me back the wrong mistakes you ever had in your brain. Because if you did my brain the most, you be doing just like the ghost.
Tanakama says it's only a principle applied when the initial planting was done for Avodah Zarah purposes. Now Yosef really says no. Elon Shenato Lubasov Abdu Asa, and Yosef Levi says no, the tree, even if the tree was initially planted just stem, without any specific intention, and only worship afterwards, nevertheless, the tree will still be Asa. Again, Rabbi Yosef Levi planted because he holds Trisasi De Adam, a person's planted this. So you know, initially, there was no intention for Avodah Zarah. Since the intentionality for Avodah Zarah comes later on, therefore halacha mentions that it depends from the identity of the tree, and it is not like the mountain or the hill. The last is Mimai, meaning Kaniseva, Mitnema Ashira Asira. Let's remember that what did they say Hashem? Why is an Ashira? Why is the Ashira?
You never want to place your sad and lost again.
The Ashira was planted by a person. The Kohen used both Trisasi
You see a picture of her staring at you. When you were still together,
that anything I see involved in,
and one piece was sad and lost again. You see a picture of her smiling at you. When you were still together, you were walking on the street. You mentioned me. That same old smile you've been thinking of all day. If you turn the clock to 0, 175% of the money you turn the clock to 0, darkness, none of this shit take me back. It's time to buy me a brand new way. Turn the clock to 0, because I never know how much I miss it. It's not enough for brand new day. Turn the clock on 0, buy something to find the swim across. Starting up a brand new day. It can happen to you, just like it happened to me. There's no way to feel. There's no way to feel. I said, no, but it's like false, man. And I'm saying,
Wait a minute.
Return the clock to 0, I said, it's not what's good, never mind the sun and the brand new day.
Into a chapter of Avodah Zarah. Similarly, Torah says, Elohim haratzos, their gods on the hills. And what do we mention? Below Kavos, Elohim. But ultimately, again, the hills cannot become their gods. So I would have said, Shomea Hanim, Kachas Kolich, Ra'anan Elohim, below Ra'anan Elohim. So I would have got you. The pasuk says, Kachas Kolich Ra'anan, underneath every green tree. I would have put the word to me about that which we find underneath the green trees, because I would say that is Avodah Zarah, the Lo Ra'anan Elohim. The tree itself cannot become Avodah Zarah. Look right there, for the pasuk says, Dashireim Kistat with the fire. The pasuk says, and the Ashiras you shall destroy in the fire. It's supposed to be sealed because of blood. Torah explicitly says that the trees are to be destroyed. Ella Kachas Kolich Ra'anan Elohim. That's the case. Then why do I need that? The phrase itself is confusing. I understand
And the clock is 0 miles, and the sun will sing across, starting off a brand new day. And turn the clock on 0 miles, will be my 30 days, starting off a brand new day. I know. At the train in the station, on the flagpole to the nation, yeah. Don't be the future. To the battles of the hell. Everything in the one teacher. And the dragon on the future. Like a father on the rain. Like a father on the train. all you lovers in the world, stand up and be counting, and a boy and a girl.
Rabbanon, I say Rabbanon, high Hashem, Sifun Ba'ish, my Hashem. So what did Rabbanon do with the phrase, the Hashem, Sifun Ba'ish? Right? What did they do with this phrase? So he was in Boile, Likivan Shenatu Mitkiva Lekah. Because if they understand this to me, what would be a reference to, a tree initially planted for Avodah Zarah, for Avodah Zarah purposes. So the word of Yossi, that you can have in Boile, but this is really Yossi. That concept to teach me about sight. That strange to support the age to teach me that if a tree was initially planted for Avodah Zarah purposes, then what? Then the mice again it's Aser. So where's the Rabbi? Rabbi Yosef, we did not mean by later. How can I be? We're looking at a situation where we'll call it trunk, where the initial tree is mutter, that which subsequently grows is going to be Aser. We're looking at a case like that. Rabbi Omer, Ivan Shenatu Ulabasov was that refers to a case of the tree that was initially planted. And then what? And then ultimately again, we refer to it into Avodah Zarah. We'll say, let's just look at this question one more time. And you also really understand, you said you would understand the phrase Ashrei Tigadim. So also we have two statements by Ashrei. One tells you Ashrei is written by burning Ashrei. The other part says Ashrei Tigadim. Cut down the Ashrei. Now, why do I need to cut down and burn? Totally burn it, but they burn it pretty quick. And burn it needs destroyed. So I need to go cut it down. Now, if you don't see where you says something fascinating, this is because of the piece of an activity which doesn't need to be burnt down. Which is that case? That's a case of an Asherah tree which is planted for stam purposes, subsequently worshipped. So we'll say what becomes Aser. Now, again, this is topics in tomorrow we're going to see more. But what happens over here in a case like that is it appears that only that which grows after the Avodah Zarah designation, in fact, becomes Aser as Avodah Zarah. So if I go, so if a person worships an Asherah tree was planted for stam purposes, a person worships it, only that which grows after the point of Avodah Zarah designation ultimately becomes Avodah Zarah. That's why Moshe says, Asher Tigadim. And in that kind of case, you have to destroy the tree. No, what do you have to do? You have to cut off whatever grew after the Avodah Zarah designation. I'll assume you're able to measure that in some way. So therefore, it's two different psukim referring to two different cases. And then the Rebbe says, so here's a Koraya that even if she initially planted for mundane purposes, and subsequently worshipped as Avodah Zarah, will in fact be Aser. But it says, no, it says, so what is the ultimately again of the primary function?
In the middle of the night, I'll go walking in my sleep. In the middle of the night, take you to the river so deep, I'm gonna feed you something. It's too hard to crawl. What I am looking for in the middle of the night, I go walking in my sleep. In the valley fear, the river so deep, I can be searching for something, hanging out of my soul, I'm having you.
I would assume that is referring to a tree which is initially planted for Avodah Zarah. Was now that we have two psukim, Hashem Tisukun Beish, Bershim Tigagigun. Therefore, both sides have extra pasuk. Hashem is Asherehem, Asherim Tisukun Beish. Both sides the initial pasuk. That's the simple key. Therefore, it then has to be destroyed. So now, what do I do with the extra pasuk of Asherim Tigagigun? Oh, I can tell you, Hashem Tigagigun, Lekilan Shenato, Ulabasov Hafu. Was a contradiction about a tree which was initially planted for regular purposes and subsequently worshipped. So the Gemara says, "My Avile Yehuda Yeshua." I'm sorry. Rabbanan, Hai Vashem Tigadir Mehatzim. Listen, this is nice. Now, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, who holds the tree for mundane purposes, and then subsequently worship it, that the tree becomes usher as avodah zarah. So they're learning it out from the phrase Vashem Tigadir. Going fantastic. What about according to the Rabbanan, the Tanakh, who holds that we'll say if you plant the tree initially for regular
that I'm looking for. In the middle of the night, I go walking in my sleep. Feel me under the pain, I'll jungle the down. Leave the river so deep, making dozens of something, searching for stuff. Only to see by the eyes of the blind. In the middle of the night. In the middle of the night, I go walking in my sleep, leaving out the door, to the river so deep, and the ocean, we all starting to see me.
When we enter into land, you're obligated to go ahead and what? You're obligated to go ahead and cut down the avodah zarah immediately. And after we conquer it, then you go back and you uproot. So it's like, it's incredible you sowed in life. And sometimes again, in the world of accomplishment, sometimes a person has to focus on finishing one goal at a time, and sometimes the person has to go ahead and pursue lessons with a number of different life initiatives, recognizing that right now they're all about 70%. Right now they're about 70%, but I need distraction to keep going forward, and I'll find the time ultimately to fill in the remaining 30% as well. It's not a right or a wrong mahalat in life. Mamish depends on what's happening. So again, the goal was I would start to knock that at. So come in, cut it down, knock it down. But the goal is destroying avodah zarah, especially this farm level, it'll take you a lot of time. Go as it says, remember again, people should still take 14 years. So first go ahead and conquer the land, knock down avodah zarah as you're going through it, conquer it, then go back and so the Gemara goes like this. So these are still going to be a lot of time. See? You pass them this bechosam. So once they ask now again, still same topic. As Rabbi Yossi says, you shall go ahead literally and destroy them with bechos. So actually, they touch them. What's actually that's really meaning? They touch them means you deconstruct. You'll deconstruct. They touch them. You deconstruct them with bechos. Bahana and leave it. You should back them as matzevosam. Break their matzevos. Bahana and leave it. Hana satarai sam. What do you leave it? So you're like supposed to burn it. Rather again, says the Gemara Amravuna L'dov v'achakach surah. Right? They'll say so. L'dov means pursue and then burn. The idea being that there was a mandate here to conquer the land. So because of the mandate ultimately to conquer the land, therefore again the obligation was not to be able to start out of destroy the stones, deconstruct the posts, and take the stones. Don't take the time ultimately to burn those to the house. After Rabbanan, Haifa, they were also brought down with the Rabbi, the Sharish Achareh. Those say that Rabbanan also that when you uproot avodah zarah, it's not just enough to destroy the object. It's not the Sharish Achareh. Also, the Sharish Achareh means you have to make sure to use any vestige of the idolatry. Rabbi Yossi, you know the Sharish Achareh building. Where's the rest of the burn? You have to go ahead and uproot the avodah zarah afterwards. Not to blame. Ultimately, you learn from the phrase that you shall destroy their name from this place. The idea being that it's not just enough to destroy the idol, not just enough to destroy the gas, it's rather they want us to actively uproot all of the avodah zarah. Again, is an incredible use as well. because it teaches you. In general, we have to read those also. The negative behavior. So this is an incredible yesod. Somebody check his card, by the way. So I just want to point out. So in this yesod, incredible Musar Hashkafa, which is also the same way I hold the Zara, that it's not just enough to stop worshiping it or to destroy the Mizbeach, or to go in and destroy the idol, but rather again, one of the sharp was Shari Shachara, also in the world of negative midos also. We don't have negative midos, no gladeros, no things. It's not just enough to stop the negative character, the negative behavior, it's not with Shari Shachara. Also, everything negative is rooted in something. Everything negative is rooted in something. It's not just enough to stop the behavior, but a person is starting with Shari Shachara. A person has to go ahead and ultimately again find the church mark on Purim. So let's say today, perhaps again in those 40 pieces of Torah, when it comes ultimately again to the Yom Tov of Purim, is a statement given to Kunin Zohar. Kunin Zohar says that Purim is Yom Tov Purim. But there's a power of Shuvah today. There's a power ultimately again of the ability to change. There's a power of the ability to go ahead and transform ourselves into something dramatic, something amazing, something something dramatically amazing. These don't get rattled I'm used to hecklers. So Purim offers us these incredible and dramatically amazing or cathartic comprehensive. So let's say the title is what is Hashem Rebbe says something absolutely amazing. He explains that on Purim is an amazing halacha. The halacha is that Kolakoshet Yad in those things. That you know that halacha is on the wrong circumstance. Somebody comes to collect their credentials. Thank you. And Purim, the halacha is Kolakoshet Yad in those things. A Jew asks, the money you give them, how much you give them, that's up to your discussion. But on Purim, you have to give. That's the halacha. Kolakoshet Yad in those things. Hashem Rebbe, but he also echoes the same so the Zohar also writes that the same way that we observe halacha here, so they also observe halacha in Shemayim. Someone extends their hands with them, so Shemayim is the same exact halacha. Whoever extends their hand, and what's about something that is touching the hand, whoever extends their hand to the almost the whole knows. Today, every other day of the year, you know, for every other day of the year, so I extend my hands up in the sparkle. I have to earn that extension, so to speak. I have to come up with something. The greatness of Purim is the same way that if another Jew asks me for something, no question asked. I extend my hands, I extend my hands, I'm saying to Rosari, he says something so beautiful. He said, this is really itself. What do you say? I can see that. What do you say to Yaakov? Gam Harvona even if someone is a Harvona is a Russian,
we are on my way. My wings are wet, 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 my wings are wet. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. We are on the way. We are on the way. In the village, the peaceful village, the lion sleeps tonight. in the village, the village, the lion sleeps tonight. But we are on the way.
Focus on our Avodah Hashem to give to our souls a little bit. Our looking is most of our hoping we have discussed. You know, to give that to the Baruch. You know, it's so circumscribed. You know, about some of us, you know, about some circumscribed. So this is all the that. I was beginning to give us some
Absolutely. Frank, I have two questions for you right now. Let's just get it going. First,
it's a beautiful guy. So let's begin. Then, hey, so although we're not going to begin by quoting the Rebbe, we'll just begin by quoting the Mishnah. So let's begin. So Hanachim are open as the heart. So let's say, remember again, let's begin. So we're speaking still in the topic of Avodah Zarah, specifically again at what could be rendered Avodah Zarah. So Hanachim are open as the heart. So if you have nothing, you can tell to worship a mountain, that's like both, or the ghost. In Torah, in Masha Ali and Asli. Those things we're going to learn. So inanimate object that, well, actually we can find the scope of this. But for our purposes right now, both the mountains, nor the mountains, nor the hills can be made into Avodah Zarah. So that which is on the mountain or that which is on the hill can be made into Avodah Zarah, but the mountain or the hill itself cannot. And the Pasuk says, the Pasuk says, you shall not go ahead. Literally, you shall not go ahead and cover. It means you shall not go ahead and worship the Kesef and Zohar, the gold and the silver which is upon them. You still hear there's only that which is upon, only that which is upon the mountain or the hill, not the mountain or the hill itself, which is problematic, which could become a moment zone. So the Gemara says, Yosef says, Elohim al Paharim. So I'll say, there's Yosef quotes, it's the same person, just a different place. The Pasuk says, Rabbi Kadunis Kalam Moshe Abdi Shalagay Sha'atim Yosef Osam as Elohim al Haparim. Go ahead and destroy your gods on the mountains. So the murder of Yosef Yidashi Elohim al Haparim, Elohim Elohim. That it's only your gods on the mountains, but the mountains themselves cannot become the gods. Elohim ala Gbos, you're not allowed to worship your gods which are on the hills. Gbos Elohim, but the hills themselves cannot become the gods. So what's it say? At first glance, it appears that this has been the same as the Karakam. Right, so there's no difference between the two. The rest of the whole thing is which is that the mountains, the hills cannot become a Sarah. That which is on the mountains, that which is on the hills can, but the mountains and hills themselves cannot. You just seem to be dashing it from different places. The Tanakama says, Rosachmo Kesef Zohab Al-Leihem. Ultimately, the Tanakama says, do not covet the gold and silver that is on them, which indicates to us that it is not the mountain or the hill which can become also, but rather only that which is upon them. And Rabbi Yosef really says, Elohim Elohim, and again, that's Elohim Elohim. But ultimately, the bottom line being the same, that it's only that which is on the mountain which becomes Hashanah or Zara, not the mountain itself. I asked the Bam Kasha, only came Ma'ashira Asura, which also says, what about Ashera? What about Ashera? This poses an existential difficulty for us, right? What about the Ashera? So the Ashera, let's remember again, is something that by definition is on the picture of the landscape. By definition is part of the earth.
Blue 42 down, says. we are on the way. So we are on the way. Yes, darling, don't steal my darling. The lion sleeps tonight. Hush, my darling, don't feel my darling. Blue 42, Omaha, down set, no, no, away. We are Mamba
Therefore, this identity transforms into an object about all the Torah. The whole shlish but tisa to the Adam Asher. And I will say whatever ultimately has tisa to the Adam, whatever was created and part by man, obviously, the totality is not created by man. It grows on its own. But the license, the origin of that thing is something that is done by man. Therefore, by definition, it can be transformed into a I'm going to be a Kiva. So the Kiva said as follows. אני עובד ועוזר לפניו. The Kiva says, I'm going to dash you. She says, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to So the Kiva says, I'm going to teach you how to dash in this possible property. How do you dash in the possible property? ومقر شعات موسي هالجبوع بجيب النساء بإسرائيل dog sham abolosco. Those that you people understand the word as follows. And in fact, speaking that we mentioned before, are in fact going ahead and giving us the markers as to where to find Abolosco. Also, what is it? The first thing is, I think these Abolosco come on the promotion of the Shamagon. Destroy all of the places where the Gentiles went ahead and worshipped idolatry. So, Atim Yoshua, some this is the land of Florida countries, as Elohim al Hahorim Haran. Their gods on the tall mountains, Ba'alat Ba'osim on the hills, the Tachas for Israel, and underneath every, was it Israel, underneath every, so that Yeshua comes along, and Yeshua said, you don't understand, Torah is not telling you how Israel is on. How do we know that? It's simple. Every Torah shows you just coming from the Israel, then what? Then what? Then what? Copy line.
Not so much right now, the ways I die for you, girl, but I get to say it. It's not your time. Nothing gonna put me down, nothing around. Not gonna find. Don't let them take it around. Don't come on, girl. You'll be a woman soon. Come take my hand.
Everybody actually seems to understand.
You'll be a woman soon. You'll be the man.
Spiritual jackpot. So bottom line, leaving aside that the Akiva's Garsha, what comes after the Mishnah is as follows. The halacha l'maisa even if one worships a mountain or a hill, so one does not transform that object into an entity of Avodah Zarah. It is only if one worships that which is on the, by the way, so it's only if one worships that which is on the mountain, that which is on the hill, those objects become Avodah Zarah. Ashira is different. Ashira is the exception. Why? Remember this phrase with the Shirish, but the Shashiri Adam. The person that was involved in the planting of the tree, therefore by definition, the person that is from the identity of the tree into a hefza of Avodah Zarah. Was it just take my hand. You be a woman. What happens if the mountain is covered in gold? Let's say the mountain itself is covered in gold. So the shaila is, let's say that one worships the mountain. So what's the shaila? What's the shaila? Good. Excellent. So the shaila is, what's the status of the cover? Right? So what's like, is the cover considered to be part of the mountain or not? Remember again, why a covering? Because a covering is different than, let's say, a statue sitting on top of it. A statue sitting on top of it is separate and distinct entity. However, again, the holding on the mountain itself, the shaila is on the mountain, and therefore can be transformed into Avodah Zarah, or is a separate and distinct entity which can be transformed into Avodah Zarah. Tanakama Saba, Tanakama Hol, Sipor Yahar, Eno Yahar, Tanakama Hol, covering of the mountain is not like the mountain. Therefore, and therefore, if you worship it, it's not becomes Avodah Zarah. That Yosef really suffered. Sipor Yahar, Yosef was supposed to know covering of the mountain is not what? Not breaking the mountain itself, and therefore, even if you worship it, the covering is not you'll be a woman soon. Please. To be like part of the mountain. Take my hand. Sorry, not considered part of the mountain. Separate than the mountain, and therefore becomes possible. As you don't see that branch, you see summer super high. You'll be a woman soon. But all the time it happens. Still doesn't cover it. But also the mountain. So, the even the Allah will still cover it. Therefore, the covering also opens not to so it's not the Aleh, but the Aleh is not referring to covering, rather the Aleh is referring to what? It's referring to idols situated on top of that. But if the Gemara suggests, although the Tanakh is the same thing, the fact that the part of the Makotis is super high. Mountain is covered in gold. What's the status of the gold? Tanakama holds that it's not like the mountain, therefore it's usher. Rabbi Yosef, it says it's buckled to the mountain, it's like the mountain, and therefore it's Summer. Equally how much we have you look at the Jesus holds that in reality everyone agrees that the covering of the mountain is not like the mountain. Now we'll say ultimately remember that's like the Tanakama that Alehem, that said the Zahab Alehem comes to include not just the separate and distinct idols situated on top of the mountain, but rather what? But even a covering, a whole covering on top of the mountain as well. So what's the machlok? This Bahalcha was the other days. Bahalcha is actually very interesting. The Elon should not be the soul of the covenant. So say watch this. What are the arguments over here? Bahalcha B'Elon should not be the soul of the covenant. One second. The issue is as follows. If you planted a tree, and you only began to worship it some later time. Look at actually just a moment. You run Shiratu. Shalom Hashem Hashem. So I planted a tree. Somebody else, right? You then planted a tree. Not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah. Will the myself up to and ultimately again only things to worship it later on. So must remember the time you dedicate to that tree is a tree planted for Avodah Zarah. In this case over here, I'm going ahead and I'm planting the tree that is the Kabbalah, and ultimately only begin to worship it later on. So the Gemara says Tanakama summer, so the Tanakama will see that. So let's say actually before we get to that, actually just a moment. Yira Shinatu, Tabrachi, then A on the page 45 to the first line. Yira Shinatu, Shilur Shemashera, who the myself of the Shaman of the Tanakama, Jama Harimu Kosha, so the Tanakama who says, and now please, and knows them with the collection of the Yotzi Bahem. So the Barim, but Ohaisa, Filasa Labo, let's go coming. The 8 several says, therefore, again, Tanakama will say that the tree that is planted not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, it's not like when the Ram becomes Avodah Zarah, the tree is Avodah Zarah, that's just like a mountain. Right? What's the case of the mountain? The mountain was there, not for Avodah Zarah, was just there, and then subsequently worshipped. So Tanakama holds that a tree planted in this tree for regular purposes, these purposes, and then when we were unworshipped, treated like the mountain. Therefore, again, the reason and little heights of Kaslavos come. The reason actually, this reading actually. So according to Tanakama, what is the Asherah which is Asher? So Shenatu Mitrilo Lekach, the Tfisas Yad Adam Inoklo, Ela Inkin Gilish Rabolis Kocham. About not to Garin Sholish Mashera, Inkin Tfisas Adam, oil that is Shaita Magdak Rabolis Kocham. Aya Umemar Gilei Takas Kodisha, and I'm going to so say Tanakama's of the essentially the heights of the trees planted in the tree for scientific purposes, and later on is worshipped as Avodah Zarah. So that tree cannot be transformed into a chefzer of Avodah Zarah. Why? Because you know that at that point in time, that tree is like what? Is like a mountain or a hill. What about Tfisas Yad Adam? What about the fact that a person was involved in it? Tfisas Yad Adam only plays the role when the tree is planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah. But if it was planted for those who just found tree purposes, other arboreal intentions, right? So then again, when Maisa, that's not called Tfisas Adam both. And therefore, they're both saying it's mutter. On the other hand, let's just read Rashi. That Rashi kind of gives us the whole Gemara. So we'll just read it. We'll see the Gemara. Rashi really made Rashi. Rabbi Yosef really comes along to say, even Shenatu Gari Yafi B'Torah Shemashira, Ulevasov Abdu Aser Jilo Dami Lahar. Someone said, ultimately, the listener says, no. Even if you planted the tree for just some reason, and then only later on you go ahead and what? You worship it. That is not like the mountain or the hill. Why not? So Yiddish but Tfisas the Adam Benazia. Because also basically he says at the end of the day, a person created this tree. Because a person created it, ultimately again has the ability to transform into Avodah Zarah once worship. So we'll say it turns out that according to this approach, actually let's read it inside. But this is the Shesha. So Shesha says, what are they arguing about? Let's say second line on here with things. Tanakama Saga, even Shmetu Levasov of the Mutter Tanakama holds that she was planted for just some intentions, right? Not about the Zarah. just plant the stem and then only worship afterwards, it is mutter. Why? Because again, the Tanakama treats that type of tree like what? Like a mountain or like a hill. What about Kisashi de Adambo? Kisashi de Adambo, Tanakama says is only a principle applied when the initial planting was done for Avodah Zarah purposes. Now Yosef really says no. Ilan Shenato Levasov Abdu Asar. And Yosef really says no, if the tree, even if the tree was initially planted, just stop without any specific intention and only worship afterwards. Nevertheless, the tree will still be awesome. Therefore, say again, Rabbi Yosef really planted because he knows Kisas the Adambo, a person planted this. So you know, initially, there was no intention for Avodah Zarah, since the intentionality for Avodah Zarah comes later on. Therefore, Allah especially from the identity of the tree, and it's not like the mountain or the hill. Whereas it's Nimai, it's Tanisuba, let's remember again, what did they say for a second? Why is it Ashira? Why is the Ashira?
She puts the color inside of my world. But she just like the queen. And all of the walls are continually changed. And I don't know I can pretend I'm obsessed with a heart in my hand. I'm starting to see maybe it's got nothing to do with me. Fathers, be good to your daughters. Daughters will love like you do. Girls become lovers who turn into mothers. So fathers, be good to your daughters.
Later on, it has the ability to become us like the Sanya of Yossi that we do the Omer. So when Yossi really says as follows: Mitoch shene'emar Elohim al ha'arim ha'arim Elohim. So let's remember again, just important to keep in mind. The pasuk itself only quotes the first phrase. The second phrase is the drasha on the pasuk. The first phrase is God coming from Israel, wipe out all of the Avodah Zarah, like what? Like Elohim al ha'arim, like your gods on the mountains. So the drasha of the Gemara is V'lo ha'arim Elohim. But the mountains cannot become their gods.
I know I should sleep, but the voices in my head go.
Similarly, Torah says, Elohim al ha'arim, your gods on the hills.
I know I should sleep,
But ultimately, again, the hills cannot become their gods. So I would have said, Shome'ani tachas kodesh ra'anan Elohim, below ra'anan Elohim. So I would have got you. The pasuk says, tachas kodesh ra'anan.
Oh, I got fucking nails.
I would have put the word in the
Bullshit.
that which you find in the relation to green trees, because I said that is Avodah Zarah, the lo ra'anan Elohim. She itself cannot become Avodah Zarah. Now, the Gemara therefore the pasuk says, "V'ashereihem kisvot u'nefaish." The pasuk says, "In the Asheros you shall destroy in the fire." So listen, you see over here that what? Torah explicitly says that the trees are to be destroyed. Ela tachas kol yitz ra'anan lama. We're supposed to say that's the case. Then why do I need that phrase? I was supposed to understand what's happening over here. The phrase itself is confusing. I mean, I understand Es Elohim al ha'arim. But it says, "You shall destroy their gods, which are on the mountains and on the hills." That gives me a clear indication that what? That the obligation to destroy Avodah Zarah is that which is on the hill, but not the hill itself. Because the hill itself is worship. The mountain itself is worship.
See that skin? It's the same she's been standing in since the day she saw him walking her way. Now she's left cleaning up the mess he made. Daughters, be good to your daughters. Daughters will love like you do.
What's going on? So if that's the case,
Girls become lovers who turn into mothers. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. Was in embrace. You find out how much they can take. Boys will be strong, and boys will do wrong. Girls will be strong without one good, high.
With the phrase that Hashem what do they do with this phrase? And he was in the violate, Livan Shenat in the because they understand this to be a reference to, but she initially planted for about Zora. Travel to Zara for this. So it was the Yossi that you didn't have any violent God. But Yossi also needs that possible to teach me about sight. That says it's a point that it should teach me that if a tree was initially planted for about Zara purposes, then what? Then the mice again it's Oscar. So where is he learning that from? So the mice says, Rabbi Yossi, you didn't have any violent God. How can I be? Now, we're taking up a situation where we'll call it for the initial tree is mutter. But that which subsequently grows is going to be awesome. Breaking up a case like that. Rabbi Omer, Elon Shenatu Olabasov.
Oh, you see that skin? It's the same she's been standing in since the day she saw him walking her way. Now she's left, cleaning up the mess he made. So fathers, be good to your daughters. Daughters will love like you do. Girls become lovers who turn into mothers. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. Boys, you can break. You'll find out how much they can take. Boys will be strong. Boys will do wrong. Boys will be gone without one man. Good, good, high.
That's why the person says, Asher Tigadiyun. And in that kind of case, do you have to destroy the tree? No.
On behalf of every man, looking out for every girl, you are the flower in the great of her world. Fathers, be good to your daughters. Daughters will love like you do. Girls become lovers, turn into mothers. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. So mothers, be good to your daughters
the Gemara is speaking the pasuk Asher disciplined by it. Should actually very cross. Asher is from the eight now. So the Yosef and Ruben have to know, right? And the base of Ruben stuck with myself up to. So the last of Hebrew no namash. Let's listen to this. But yet the Gemara is bringing the pasuk of Asher disciplined by it, not the pasuk of Asher disciplined, which was Hebrew no namash. Let's hear something about Hebrew no namash disciplined by it. Had the pasuk not said you have to burn the Ashera, and you see Omer Asher disciplined. I would have said you have to cut down the extra. What is that talking about? The Elon Shenatu Mikilo Lakach. Listen, I would have assumed that would, see, had the Torah not said, Hashem Tisapun Ba'ish, and all it would have said is, Hashem Tikadayin, I would have assumed that is referring to a tree which is initially planted for Abu Yisrael. Hashem Tisapun Ba'ish, was a now that we have two psukim, Hashem Tisapun Ba'ish, referring to Gadiyun. Therefore, both sides of the extra part, Hashem Tisapun Ba'ish, that's the simple thing. Therefore, again, it has to be destroyed. So now, what do I do with the extra pasuk of Ashrei Tikadei? Or I can tell you, Ashrei Tikadei, Mekilon Shanato Olabasov. Was an contribution by the tree, which was initially planted for regular purposes and subsequently worshipped. So the Gemara says, "My Avile Yechudei." I'm sorry. Rabbi, Hi Hashem Tikadei Mehadi. Now, according to Yosef and Yehuda, he only speaks for mundane purposes. And then subsequently worshipping, that the tree becomes usher as avodah zarah. So the learning it out from the phrase Hashem Tikadei is fantastic. What about according to the Rabbi, who holds that, let's say, if you plant the tree initially for regular purposes, and it was, and then worship it, that the tree remains mother, and the tree does not transform into avodah zarah. So what do they do with the phrase Hashem Tikadei? This is amazing. How about my Abdullah? The kids are the Shomalay. This is amazing. They use it for the Josh and Shomalay. Or the Shomalay. So Drum Shomalay, the doing of bonus Kohabim, told him the Kibush Eretz Yisrael. Kibush Eretz Yisrael, called them Leader Avodas Kohabim. This is amazing. So the Shomalay holds that in the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, there were two steps in the destruction of Avodah Zarah. The first step was cutting down the Avodah Zarah. So literally, they just cutting it down with the idol, knocking it over. And then, the primary objective was the conquering and capturing of Eretz Yisrael. After Eretz Yisrael was conquered and captured, then what? Then they went back and destroyed the Avodah Zarah. So it was an amazing story. So what happens again? The three Oti Kochavim called them the Kibush. So the knocking down of the cutting down of Avodah Zarah, that preceded the conquering of the land. As they're rolling through the land, so ultimately they're going to have to cut down, push down, knock over whatever they can. But they can't spend the time destroying it. Because right now, again, it has to be Kibush. So however, Kibush Eretz Yisrael called him Levilah. Also, the conquering of the land has to precede ultimately and then the destruction of Avodah Zarah. Take a look at that in this moment. You do Avodah Zarah from the Kibush Eretz Yisrael, actually says, when we enter into the land, we were obligated to go ahead and what? We were obligated to go ahead and cut down the Avodah Zarah immediately. And after we conquered, then you go back and you uproot. So it's like, it's incredibly slowly like there's something again in the world of the company. There's different ways of sometimes a person has to focus on finishing one goal at a time. Sometimes the person has to go ahead and pursue with a number of different life institutions, recognizing that right now they're all about 70%. Right now they're about 70%, but I need to track to keep going forward, and I'll find the time also to fill in the remaining 30% as well. It's not a right or a wrong about how it's life. Time depends on what's happening. You see, Rabbi Israel again, the Google was Avodah Zarah to be knocked out of commission. So come in, cut it down, knock it down. But the goal will be here is keep. The goal will be here is to conquer the land. Destroying Avodah Zarah, especially this farm of Avodah Zarah, will take you a lot of time. As you can remember, again, people should feel it takes 14 years. So first go ahead and conquer the land, knock down Avodah Zarah as you're going through it, conquer it, then go back and destroy it. First, the Gemara goes like this. The Gemara goes like this. So here's our circle of the last time. Kind of Yosef, you touch them is Bechosam. So what they ask now again, still same topic. As the Yosef says, you shall go ahead and destroy them as vehicles. So actually, in Tashna also actually just meaning in Tashna means to deconstruct. You deconstruct. In Tashna, you will deconstruct them as vehicles. Bahana, and leave it. Yishibat Matzevosam, break their Matzevos. Bahana, and leave it. Hanach Sataraita, what do you mean leave it? Say nobody supposed to burn it. Rather again, says, Amrapuna, Redov, the Achatach, Surah. right? So the dope needs to pursue and then burn. The idea being also that there was a mandate here to conquer the land. So because of the mandate ultimately to conquer the land, therefore again the obligation was not to have all the Zara out of commission, destroy the stones, reconstruct the vehicles, but then move forward. Don't take the time ultimately to burn it down. So after Rabbanon, highly by Leila Oker, Oker, Avodah Rabbi, Shetzach B'Sharish Acharah. Those say the Rabbanon ultimately use this passage to teaching that when you uproot Avodah Zarah, it's not just enough to destroy the object. Shetzach B'Sharish Acharah. Those say B'Sharish Acharah means you have to make sure to remove any vestige of the idolatry. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi Yehuda l'Shari Shachar Eminale. Where the Yossi we can learn that you have to go ahead and uproot the Avodah Zarah afterwards. Nafkamei, the Barikam Es Shemami Namakomam. Ultimately, you learn from the phrase that you shall destroy their name from this place. The idea being that it's not just enough to destroy the idol, not just enough to destroy the death, but rather it just wants to actively uproot all of the Avodah Zarah. Listen, again, is an incredible use as well. Because it teaches you, also in general, we have to read those also with negative behavior. Mazel tov. So, this is an incredible yesod. Somebody check this card, by the way. So I just want to point out. So in this yesod, incredible Musar and Hashkafa, which is also the same way in Avodah Zarah, that it's not just enough to stop worshiping it or to destroy the Mizbeach or to go in and destroy the idol, but rather again, one of the sons was Shari Shachara. Also in the world of negative midos also. We don't have negative midos, no glaveros, those things. It's not just enough to stop the negative character, the negative behavior. It's not with Shari Shachara. Also, every behavior is rooted in something. Everything negative is rooted in something. It's not just enough to stop the behavior, but a person is starting with Sharish Achara. A person has to go ahead and ultimately again find the certain part on Purim. So let's say there's the Koach of Purim. It's very well known. Perhaps again in those 40 pieces of Torah, when it comes ultimately again to the Yom Tov of Purim, is a statement in the Tikkun Zohar. The Tikkun Zohar says that Purim is Yom Tov. If there's a power of Tshuva today, if there's a power ultimately again of the ability to change, there's the power of the ability to go ahead and transform ourselves into something dramatic, something amazing, something that rock it off. Something dramatically amazing. Usually don't get rattled so I'm used to heckler. So Purim offers us this incredible and dramatically amazing opportunity for cathartic, comprehensive change. It's like the Shaila is what is about something about Kodesh says something absolutely amazing. And you experience that on Purim is an amazing halacha. The halacha is that Kolaboshik Yad Yosef. That that halacha is under normal circumstances somebody comes to collect their credentials, thank you. And Purim, the halacha is Kolaboshik Yad Yosef. A Jew asks, the money you give them, how much you give them, that's up to your discretion. But a Purim you have to give. That's the halacha. Kolaboshik Yad Yosef. So Hashem Kodesh, but you also have to listen to so. Mizar also writes that the same way that we observe halacha here, so the Rothschild observes halacha in Shemayim. If someone extends their hand with them, so Shemayim is the same exact halacha. Whoever extends the hand, and what's the Hashem that is a touch of the hand, whoever extends their hand to the Rebbe Shalom, knows it. Today, every other day of the year, even Yom Kippur, every other day of the year, so I extend my hands up in this Baruch Hu. I have to earn that extension, so to speak. I have to come up with something. The greatness of Purim is the same way that if another Jew asks me for something, no questions asked, I give. So today, when I extend my touch in the hand, when I extend my hand, I'll shut up goes on and it's something so beautiful. He said, this is alluded to in the Gilad itself. What do you say? Actually, you have to say in Shoshanas Yaakov. What do you say in Shoshanas Yaakov? Yigam Charvona Zocher Lato. Even if someone is a Charvona, we'll say, let's Charvona. Charvona is from Lashon, the church of Chara, of destroy. even if someone is broken, even if someone is broken, even if someone is spiritually compromised, the Gam Chavona, Zachor. Today is the day of Kala Koshik Gandhi. Today is the day where we extend our hands like a sparrow. There is no telling what we can accomplish. There is no telling how we can go. Listen, I know it sounds crazy because Purim, we often don't think of Purim as a day of Aliyah. We don't think of Purim ultimately as a day of spiritual growth because there's so much simcha, and the simcha itself is centered a little bit like a little bolus, sometimes a little bit of silliness, which is good. That's part of the nature of the day. Amplified, exaggerated simcha, and we're running around in these manos, they're all beautiful. So those are these seem like the day of incredible contemplation. So listen, but it is. But it is. So we have to make sure that we have our time today because we have hearts and hands, because we extend our hands up and I know I'm not always here, and I know I'm not always connected, and I'm not always doing the right thing. I'm doing it. I have my good days, I have my bad days, I have my good days, I have my down days. Today's Purim, I'm here. Today's Purim, I'm going to have Kabbalah during my tears. Today's Purim, I'm going to daven for others. Today's Purim, I'm davening for myself. Today's Purim, ultimately, I'm going to try to figure out how to be energized and how to be connected to that for this Purim. And the great promise we have is called Koshik Yad. All we need to do is extend our hands up to Purim, and if we do so, no sin. Shibizok Hamir Tashem K'nei B'Sina, K'nei B'Sina, Shibizok K'nei giving to others who are in need for my house for Yonim, Shibizok Hamir Tashem K'nei giving of access of people to Manos, we should make the day of giving ultimately to ourselves by keeping our time. Hopefully we're not rushing off to work as quickly as we have to go at all. Only a little bit more time to gather, a little bit more time to change, a little bit of time just to focus on our Avodah Hashem, to give to our souls a little bit, to our ruchiness. Most of all, hopefully we have this course, be able to keep track of this Baruch, ourselves track of this Baruch, about time of this Baruch, about Shabbat track of this Baruch, and it's the course of all of that feeling, that from the Baruch, reciprocity, it's Rafa, it's not coming to the shower upon us, call this hour to Dino and Yivros and Sarsino.
I hooked up with a girl the other day. And my house said, she said, before we go any further, I need to tell you my safe things. So I've been feeling comfortable and I want you to stop.
Beautiful data. So let's begin. Hey, shall we? So although we're not going to begin by quoting the Rebbe, we'll begin by quoting the Mishnah. So let's begin. So Hanachim Ha'okim Esahar. So remember again, let's begin. So we're speaking still in the topic of Avodah Zarah, specifically again at what could be rendered Avodah Zarah. So Hanachim Ha'okim Esahar. So if you have nothing, you try how to worship a mountain, that's like both, or the hills. In Torah, Umash Alei and Asir. So it says we're going to learn. So inanimate objects that actually will define the scope of this. But for our purposes right now, both the mountains, nor do I just say neither the mountains nor the hills can be made into Avodah Zarah. So that which is on the mountain or that which is on the hill can be made into Avodah Zarah, but the mountain or the hill itself cannot. As the Pasuk says, the Pasuk says, you shall not go ahead. Literally, you shall not go ahead and covet. You shall not go ahead and worship the Kesef and Zohar, the gold and the silver which is upon them. So you see over here, there's only that which is upon, the mountain or the hill, not the mountain or the hill itself, which is problematic, which could be some of all the Zohar. So the Gemara Yosef really says, Elohim al Ha'aretz. So I'll say, Yosef quotes this, it's the same passage, just a different phrase. The passage says, Rabbi have done his column at most of the Amisham and Sha'atim Yoshim Osam as Elohim al Ha'aretz. Go ahead and destroy your gods on the mountains. So the Gemara Yosef really dashes Elohim al Ha'aretz. Elohim, that it's only their gods on the mountains, but the mountains themselves cannot become the gods. Elohim ala Gibos, you're not allowed to worship their gods which are on the hills. Elohim, but the hills themselves cannot become the gods. So at first glance, it appears that Rabbi Yosef really is saying the same exact thing as the Tanakh. Right? There is no difference between the two of them. Right? So they're both saying the same thing, which is that the mountains, the hills cannot become Avodah Zarah. That which is on the mountains, that which is on the hills can, but the mountains and hills themselves cannot. You just seem to be dashing it from different places. The Tanakama says, Losachmo Kesef Zohav Aleihem. Ultimately, the Tanakama says, do not covet the gold and silver that is on them, which indicates to us that it is not the mountain or the hill which can become also, but rather only that which is upon them. And Rabbi Yosef really says, Elohim Eloharim, and again, directly below Elohim Elohim. But ultimately, the bottom line being the same, that it's only that which is on the mountain which becomes Asad Avodah, not the mountain itself. I asked the Bab Kasha, Umitnei Ma'ashera Asura, which also says, what about Ashera? What about Ashera? It poses an existential difficulty for us, right? What about the Ashera? So the Ashera, let's remember again, is something that by definition is part of the picture of the landscape, by definition is part of the earth. Yet again, we see it is Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, using what we just learned before, Losat either Aleihem or Elohim Alaharim Elohim Elohim, why would Ashera be usher? Well, so here we go. Because I will say, literally translated, it has Tisas Yad Adam, literally means like yesterday we would say, it has man's fingerprints on it. The idea is that this item has man's involvement. Rashi says, what does this mean, man's involvement? Sha'adam not a person planted it. So we'll say, because a person planted it, this is considered to be something created by man. Because it's something created by man, therefore, by definition, it is subject ultimately to being transformed into Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, in other words, what the Mishnah seems to be saying is as follows: anything that is naturally formed in this world, by definition, cannot be transformed into a chefcha, into an object of Avodah Zarah, even if it is worship. So therefore, even if I worship the mountain doesn't become Avodah Zarah. The hill doesn't become Avodah Zarah. I using that logic, and Ashera, as the Lord which is a tree, which people pray to, which people worship, shouldn't become Avodah Zarah either. Elamai trees different by Avodah Zarah, but the tree was planted by man. The tree was planted by man. Since the tree was planted by man, this is what the Mishnah calls. The person was involved in this, the creation of this entity. Therefore, this item can be transformed into an object of Avodah Zarah. The Chosh Yish but Visas Yidei Adam Osir. And I will say, whatever ultimately has Visas Yidei Adam, whatever was created and part by man, obviously, the tree in its totality is not created by man. The tree is planted, the tree grows on its own. But the license is the origin of that tree is something that is done by man. Therefore, by definition, it can be transformed into Avodah Zarah. I'm going to be a keeper. So the keeper said as follows: I'm the Ovin Va'odon Lefana. So the keeper says, I'm going to dash. Rashi says over here, remember, I'm Ovin Va'odon Lefanacha, and Farish Va'odon Lefanacha. So the keeper says, I'm going to teach you how to dash in this process properly. How do you dash in the process properly? Makom Sha'anta Motzi Har Gavoa V'Giva Nisa Ve'Itzra Anan Da Shilish Sham Avodas Kocham. So let's say that the Yeshiva understands over here as follows. And in fact, the tzitzim that we mentioned before, are in fact going ahead and giving us the markers as to where to find Avodah Zarah. Also, what is that? The pasuk reads, "Adei Tabdunas Kala Mekamot Asher Avi Tamagoni." Destroy all of the places where the Gentiles went ahead and worshipped idolatry. So Asher Atim Yerushalayim, this is the land that you are inheriting. As Elohim al Hachorim Arabim, their gods on the tall mountains, Ba'alak Ba'osim on the hills, the Tachas called Isra Anan, underneath every, was it Isra Anan, beneath every green tree. So that the Akiva comes along, and the Akiva says, you don't understand, Torah is not just telling you the obligation to describe Avodah Zarah. How do we know that? Says Rabbi Akiva. Because simple. If the Torah goes to just coming to describe Avodah Zarah, then what? Coffee line, what's happening back there? A lot of guys over there. And so the Torah could have just said, describe Avodah Zarah. Why do you have to get in on the mountains, on the hills, on the beaches? Why do you need that? And the Akiva says the Torah is actually giving us geographic markers. So it's giving us like Avodah Zarah GPS, telling you that by the way, you get into Canaan and you have to root out the Avodah Zarah, I'm going to tell you where to find the Avodah Zarah. You have Avodah Zarah on top of the mountains. You have Avodah Zarah on top of the trees. Excuse me, on top of the hills. You have Avodah Zarah is often the big green trees. So therefore, again, as Akiva understands, the Torah, even Akiva loves Dafka disagreeing with that which we mentioned before. I mean, it could be very well agreeing with the statements of the Jews, Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. I believe they are not disagreeing. Everybody actually seems to be on the same page. Also, it's a beautiful day for this Mishnah. It's Purim. They have Achdus, they have Shalom. Mamish, a Mishnah without machlokas. A Mishnah without machlokas. It doesn't get better than this. This is Mamish like a spiritual jackpot. It doesn't get better than this. Mishnah without machlokas on a day of Achdus. Already Akiva is saying is in addition to the halachic ramifications that the Tanakh and Yosef really brought out of the pasuk. There's another piece which is the Torah which is identifying for us where to find that Avodah Zarah, where to find the house, where to find the excuse in order to root it out. Good. So we'll say, so bottom line, what comes out from the Mishnah is as follows. Reading aside that the Akiva's Drasha, what comes out from the Mishnah is as follows. The halacha l'maisa, even if one worships a mountain or a hill, so one does not transform that object into an entity of Avodah Zarah. It is only if one worships that which is on the mountain, because it is part of the so it's only if one worships that which is on the mountain, that which is on the hill, those aspects become Avodah Zarah. Ashira is different. Ashira is the exception. Why? Remember this phrase, because since a person, the contract was involved in the planting of the tree, therefore, by definition, a person has the ability to transform the identity of the tree into a chetza of Avodah Zarah. What's it just as an aside? What's it why are they putting the Avodah Zarah on top of the mountain, on top of the hill? That's from us. That's from us. Remember, it's halacha. What's halacha? Shul, right? It's like necessary to the Avodah Zarah to be our shuls per se. But a shul, like usually, the halacha says, it's also the highest place in the city. Historically, there often did not happen because of anti-Semitic persecution. Jews weren't allowed to do that. But in fact, the halacha is the Beis Hashem is always supposed to be placed on the highest point in the particular city. So Avodah Zarah borrowed that concept from us as well. God says to Gemara, Rabbi Yosef reads the Tanakama. Oh, so the Gemara asks our Kasha, Rabbi Yosef reads the Tanakama are saying the same thing. Rabbi Yosef both are saying you worship the mountain, you can't make the mountain with Avodah Zarah, but for us, you can go ahead and take that which is on the mountain into Avodah Zarah. But I will say, no. See, we've been around the Talmudic block a couple of times. So we know already there's a difference between the two different opinions. Then what? There is a machloket, and you're arguing about something. Because the Israel is what is now a Kama and Rabbi Yosef and the Shas are saying the same thing. Rabbi Yosef read the Hayut HaKama, our Rabbi Kama, our Yitzchakish, Sikoi Har Kehar Ike Benai. What's the reason to this interesting afternoon? The afternoon, the difference between the two, and the machloket between the two, is what happens if the mountain is covered in gold. Sikoi Har Kehar. Let's say the mountain itself is covered in gold. So the Shaila is, let's say that one worships mountains. So what's the Shaila? Good. Excellent. So the Shaila is, what's the status of the covering? Right? The most is the covering considered to be part of the mountain or not? Remember again, why a covering? Because the covering is different than, let's say, a statue sitting on top of it. The statue sitting on top of it is clearly a separate and distinct entity. However, again, the coating on the mountain itself, the Shaila is it part of the mountain? And therefore it can't be transformed into Avodah Zarah, or is a separate and distinct entity which can be transformed into Avodah Zarah. Tanakama Sabar, the Tanakama holds, Sikoi Har Ke'eno Sehar. Tanakama holds that the covering of the mountain is not like the mountain, and therefore, Umnissa. And therefore, if you worship it, the mamish becomes Avodah Zarah. Rabbi Yosef really suffer, Sikoi Har Harei Kehar. Yosef really holds that no, the covering of the mountain is mamish like what? Mamish like the mountain itself, and therefore, even if you worship it, the covering does not become asur. What's the particular discussion is the Lord? Tanakama Salah Sikoi Har Ke'eno Kehar Misad Sid Lo Sachmon Kesef Alei. So we'll say that Tanakama story is the pasuk says Lo Sachmon Kesef Zahav Alei. The Tanakama understands that that person is coming to cover even this case. Even if the Kesef and Zod is Alayim, even if the Kesef and Zod literally covers the mountain, still nevertheless it is not considered concealed. It is considered to be like part of the mountain, and therefore again, I'm sorry, not considered to be part of the mountain, separate than the mountain, and therefore becomes us. As you see at Rashi, you see Summer Sikui Hashad, the Yosef really holds that the covering of the mountain is like the mountain itself. Bottle Agave Hak, still that the covering is bottle to the mountain itself. The Chayban Da'ala will just go up, and the mountain can't be turned into a form of idolatry. Sikui Nami Lobisa. Therefore, the covering also does not become us. The Alei and Dikra Akasirik Elohim Tushikoi. There was the other the Alei. The Alei is not referring to covering, rather the Alei is referring to what? Is referring to the idols situated on top of the mountain. Therefore, the Gemara suggests, although the Tanakama should be saying the same thing, the fact that because they must notice the secret mountain is covered in gold, what's the status of the gold? Tanakama holds that it's not like the mountain, therefore it's usher. The Yosef says it's bundled to the mountain, like the mountain, and therefore Shishi Saba, Shishi says no. Equally how much secret has you don't have. So Shishi told that in reality, everyone agrees that the covering of the mountain is not like the mountain. And I must ultimately remember, dashing like the Tanakama, that Aleihem, Kesef, is Zahab, Aleihem comes to include not just a separate and distinct idol situated on top of the mountain, but rather what? But even a covering, a gold covering on top of the mountain as well. So what's the machlokes? V'halcha, we'll say other days. V'halcha is actually very interesting. The Elon Shenatu Ulevasov of Dukamit. We'll say, watch this. Watch this. So what are the arguments about over here? V'halcha b'Elon Shenatu Ulevasov of Dukamit. We'll say, the issue is as follows. If you planted a tree, and he only began to worship it some later on. So keep asking just a moment. You learned so I planted a tree, somebody else, right? Moving planted a tree, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, will myself up to, and ultimately again, it only begins to worship it later on. So let's remember, the time began to use an actual tree is a tree planted for Avodah Zarah, and it's from the beginning. In this case over here, I'm going ahead and I'm planting the tree at any specific Kabbalah, and also the only begin to worship it later on. So the Gemara says, Tanakama Sabra, so the Tanakama holds, so let's actually before we get started, we're actually just a moment. Ilan Shinatu, Tabrashi, then on the page 45, verse 5. Ilan Shinatu, Shivoli Shimashera, for myself on me. The Shaman of the Tanakama, Dama Harimu Kabo shows, so what's the name of the Tanakama, he says, the now please and those are with her, who I think called Yotzi Bahem, Shimukubare, but no Haisa Kirasa Lavodas Kohabi. The eight several says therefore again, the Tanakama will say that the tree that is planted not for the sake of Avodah Zarah initially. This time it's when the Rabbi becomes Avodah Zarah, the tree is supposed to say that's just like a mountain. Right? What's the case of the mountain? The mountain was there, not for Avodah Zarah, it was just there, and then subsequently worshipped. So Tanakama holds that a tree planted initially for particular purposes, three purposes, and then only later on worship is treated like a mountain. Therefore, again, there is just reading Rashi. So according to Tanakama, what is the Ashira which is Asher? So Shenatu Mitchila Lekach, the Tisas Yad Adam Enoklu, Ella Inkin Kilishima Bolisko Fathers. About Notre Garin Sholishima Shira, Injut Tisas Adam, Oil that he shite a lot die for Bolisko Father. Haya Umemat Elaine Kakas called Israel, but it's Axel. So say Tanakamas of the opinion, essentially the mice of the tree is planted initially for standing purposes, and later on is worshipped as Avodah Zarah, so that tree cannot be transformed into a hefzer of Avodah Zarah. Why? Because you know that at that point in time, that tree is like what? Is like a mountain or a hill. What about Isas Yad Adam? What about the fact that a person was involved in it? Isas Yad Adam only plays the role when he's choosing to plant things like Avodah Zarah. But if it was planted for absolute illusion, just establishing purposes, other arboreal intentions, have that one. Right? So then again, Lemaisa, that's not called Isas the Adam bow. And therefore, you're both second is mutter. On the other hand, this is Rashi, that Rashi kind of gives us old words, or just read no sitting Gemara. Rashi Wilson really made us, and Wilson really comes along to say, Elon Shinatu Gari Akidu Shorishim Ashira, Ulavaso, Abdu, Usr, Pilos Dami Lahar. So most like ultimately the risk says no, even if you plant it initially for just time reasons, and then only later on you go ahead and watch, you worship it. That is not like the mountain or the hill. Why not? So Yesh but Isasi de other than because also basically you said that at the end of the day a person created is true. Because a person created ultimately again has the ability to transform its level of one's worship. So we'll say it turns out that according to this approach, actually let's read the side. Remember this is Rav Sheshes. So Sheshes says, what are they arguing about? Bacha b'Yivah should not move us off to come into the what's his second line on here with these. Tanakama Sabar, Yivah should not move us off to Mutter. Tanakama holds that if she was planted for just stam intention, right? Not about the Zara, just plant the stam and then only worship afterwards, it is Mutter. Why? Because again, the Tanakama treats that type of tree like what? Like a mountain or like the hill. What about Jesus? They are done both. Jesus, they are about how Tanakama says it's only a principle applied when the initial planting was done for Avodah Zarah purposes. Now Yosef really says no. Elon should not rule myself of the Asa. Yosef really says no. The tree, even if the tree was initially planted just stem, without any specific intention, and only worship afterwards, nevertheless, the tree will still be Asa. Now both say again, Rabbi Yosef really is logic because he knows Tvisasi de Adam, a person planted this. So you know initially there was no intention for Avodah Zarah, since the intentionality for Avodah Zarah comes later on. Therefore, halacha l'maisa that people depend on the identity of the tree, and it is not like the mountain or the hill. So you guys are doing right. Maybe 26, it may not ashira asira. Let's remember again, what did the Sefer say? Why is it ashira? Why is the ashira tree also? If they sheish but tvisasi de adam, because it will say the ashira was planted by a person. The choshiyish both tvisasi de adam asir. And anything that is ultimately has human involvement in its creation, which means that anything that has human involvement has the ability to evolve into an capsa of Avodah, has the ability to transform ultimately into an object of Avodah. Because Yesh both Tvisas Adam, La'asiyim. So what is when the Mishnah says anything that has Tvisas Adam, what does that come to include? My love, La'asiyim Ivan Shenatu, Ulubasov. We'll say, does that not come to include this particular case of a tree that initially was planted for just stem tree purposes and later on ultimately was worshipped? To tell you that such a tree does have the ability to in fact become Asr. The Af Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Elon Shnatul Lavasov Abdu Asr, and ultimately again, even Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda holds that if a tree was planted initially, again, it was for stem purposes, and only worshipped later on. And it has the ability to become us at this sign of Yossi that we do the Omer. So Yossi we says as follows. Mitoch Shene'emar Elohim al Haharim V'lo Haharim Elohim. So let's remember again, now just the point to keep in mind. The pasuk itself only quotes the first phrase. The second phrase is the Russia on the pasuk. The first phrase is God's coming from Israel, wipe out all of the Avodah Zarah, like what? Like Elohim al Haharim. Like their gods on the mountain. So the Russia, the Gemara is below Haharim Elohim. But the mountains cannot become their gods. Which teaches us that you can't transform a mountain into a chefza of Avodah Zarah. Similarly, the Torah says, Elohim halakvos, their gods on the hills. And what do we get? Below Kavos, Elohim. Ultimately, again, the hills cannot become their gods. So I would have said, Shomea Ani, Tachas Kol Ra'anan Elohim, below Ra'anan Elohim. Because I would have gotten, the pasuk says, Tachas Kol Ra'anan, underneath every green tree. I would have put the word in the saying, if that which you find underneath the green trees, because I would say, that is Avodah Zarah, the low Ra'anan Elohim. He itself cannot become Avodah Zarah. But therefore the pasuk says, Dashireim Tisrafu Nefma'im. The pasuk says, in the Ashiras, you shall destroy in the fire. It wasn't the seal because of blood. Torah explicitly said that the trees are to be destroyed. Ela Tachas Kol Ra'anan Olam. If that's the case, then why do I need that phrase? You understand what's happening with this? The phrase itself is confusing. I understand Es Elohim al-Hori Ha'alamin va'al-Jabal. So it usually says, you shall destroy their gods, you shall on the mountains and on the hills. That gives me a clear indication that what? That the obligation to describe what was already that is on the hill, but not the hill itself, even if the hill itself is worship, even if the mountain itself is worship. Yet when it comes to Asherah, what does the Torah say? Parachas called Isra'ana. Why does that list of Parachas? Parachas means what? Underneath the itself, I would have thought that what is the Torah telling me? The tree itself cannot become up with the Torah, but the idols underneath the trees can. So one second, the Torah itself says that grave is the grave. The Torah itself says that what? You have to destroy the Asherahs. It tells me what? That the Asherahs can become.
Young
The
teacher,
Asherahs can become
the
Avodah. What's going on? So if that's the case, the Asherahs can become Avodah. So then why you put the Achas Kol Yisrael Avu Yisrael? Listen, that's come to teach us again, Rabbi. What does Rabbi say? Thus, how we look at the people who does. Let me read Akiva. I mean, open the Adul Lefanah. You ready to explain the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva came along and said, I'll dance in the Pasuk for you. Come up and start the most young of all, they've given a song. And he's giving us the direction of Shemasa was telling us, you come and dance in and it means you find the high mountains or a high hill, the Eitzvahana or a beach. That's the Shabbat was still coming. You're going to say that. What? No, it says that will be done. This is such a passionate. Notice how rapid Abu Dhar was on the man before Abu Dhar getting passionate. And literally again, Abu Dhar was dead.
young
You know,
teacher,
Abu
the
Dhar. You know, Abu Dhar.
of school broken to see. She wants so badly, knows what she wants to be. Inside her, there's longing. This girl's an open page, bookmarking, so close now. This girl is half his age. Don't stand, don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. Don't stand, don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. My friends are so jealous. You know how bad girls get. Sometimes it's not so easy to do the teacher's test.
The cat which subsequently grows is going to be awesome. Where can you have a case like that? Have Omer, Ivan Shenatu, Ulabasov. Also, that refers to a case of a tree that was initially planted, and then what? And then ultimately again was later on to travel over stuff. Let's just look at this structure one more time. The Yosef really understood, Yosef really understands the phrase Ashereti doesn't work. So those are the two statements by Ashereti. One tells me Ashereti is different by burning Ashereti. The other part says Ashereti doesn't cut down the Ashereti. Now, why do I need both cut down and burn? Totally burn. I mean, burn is pretty clear. I mean, burn is pretty clear. We interpret that multiple ways, right?
Speaking like teacher had temptation and frustration so bad it makes him cry. Like bus stop, they waiting, their car is coming down.
So we'll say what becomes usher now
You gave a teacher's pet temptation, frustration so bad it makes him cry. Let us stop, she's waiting, his car is running dry. Don't stand, don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. Don't stand, don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. Who's talking? The classroom. Two herds they try and try. Strong words in a staff room. The accusations fly. It's no use. He sees her. He starts to shake and cough. Just like the old man in that book by Nabokov. Don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. Don't stand so, don't stand so close to me.
which is what's that? But we're talking about the reverse reading the pasuk. The reverse reading the pasuk. Actually, that's the right pasuk. That changes from the Asian pasuk. But the Osher is good how we do it. Say, and the base of the stuck with myself up. So you might be the lashon even low namas. Let's listen to this. But you have to bringing the pasuk of Hashem from the Asian. Not the pasuk of Hashem Tigadelu, which was Kilo Ne'emat. So here's how to read them out. Kilo Ne'emat is the Ba'ish. Had the pasuk not said you have to burn the Asherah, Hayisi Omer Hashem Tigadelu, I would have said you have to cut down the Asherah. What is that talking about? I would have assumed that would see had the Torah not said Hashem discipline Ba'ish, and all it would have said is Hashem Tigadelu. I would have assumed that is referring to a tree which is initially planted for apple Mizrah. Was now that we have two psukim, Hashem Tisukun Ba'ish, brushing into that wood. Therefore, both sides of extra pasuk, Asherehem, Asherim Tisukun Ba'ish. That's the simple thing. Therefore, again, it has to be destroyed. So now, what do I do with the extra pasuk of Hashem Tigadelu? Oh, I can tell you, Hashem Tigadelu, Mechila, Shenato, Olabasov, also when it comes to teaching about a tree, which was initially planted for regular purposes and subsequently worshipped. And the Gemara says, my Avile, which is that you're terminating. I'm sorry. Rabbanan, Hai Hashem Tigadelu, my Avile. We'll say this is much. Now, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, initially for mundane purposes, and then subsequently worship it, that the tree becomes asur as avodah zarah. So they're learning it out from the phrase Hashem Tigadelu. It's fantastic. What about according to the Rabbi on the Tanakh? Who holds that we'll say you plant the tree initially for regular purposes and then what? And then worship it, that the tree remains mutter, then the tree does not transform into avodah zarah. So then what do they do with the phrase Hashem Tigadelu? This is amazing. How Hashem Tigadelu my Avile? If you get your children labor, we'll say this is amazing. They use it for the Joshua children labor. The doing avodas kochavim called me Kibush Eretz Yisrael. Kibush Eretz Yisrael called them Lefiler avodas kochavim. This is amazing. So the Tribulation holds that in the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, there were two steps in the destruction of avodah zarah. The first step was cutting down the avodah zarah. Like literally, he's cutting it down, so I don't knock it over. But then the primary objective was the conquering and capturing of Eretz Yisrael. After Eretz Yisrael was conquered and captured, then what? Then they went back and destroyed the avodah zarah. So what's amazing story? So what happens again? These three Ozi Kochavim called them the Kibush. So they're knocking down or cutting down on the avodah zarah. That preceded the conquering of the land. As they're rolling through the land, so ultimately they're going to have to cut down, push down, knock over whatever they can. But they can't spend the time destroying it. Because right now, again, it has to be Kibush. So however, Kibush Eretz Yisrael called him Lefiler. Also, the conquering of the land has to precede ultimately and then the destruction of all the soul. Take a look at Rashi this moment. The Jew of all this come from Kibush Eretz Yisrael, Rashi says, that in such an extabu the Gadam Yad. When we enter into land, we are obligated to go ahead and what? We are obligated to go ahead and cut down the avodah zarah immediately. And after we conquer it, then you go back and you operate. So it's like, it's an incredibly story of life. It's something, again, in the world of accomplishment, there are different ways that a person has to pursue goals. Sometimes, a person has to focus on finishing one goal at a time. And sometimes the person has to go ahead and pursue rescue through a number of different life initiatives, recognizing that right now they're all about 70%. Right now they're about 70%, but I need the traction to keep going forward, and I'll find the time ultimately to fill in the remaining 30% as well. It's not a right or a wrong mahalik in life. It mamish depends on what's happening. So you see, Klal Yisrael again, the goal was avodah zarah to be knocked out of commission. So come in, cut it down, knock it down. But the goal over here is keep it. The goal over here is to conquer the land. Destroying avodah zarah, especially this farm of avodah zarah, taking a lot of time. Go as it stands. Remember again, people should feel it takes 14 years. So first go ahead and conquer the land, knock down avodah zarah as you're going through it, conquer it, then go back and destroy it. Because the Gemara goes like this. So you start so calling the last time. Tell Rabbi Yossi, you touch them is bechosam. So we'll say as now again, still same topic. As Rabbi Yossi says, you shall go ahead literally and destroy them as vehicles. So So actually, the intention I was actually just means the intention is to deconstruct. You'll deconstruct. The intention you will deconstruct their mistakes. Bahana and leave it. Bishibartim es matzevosam. Break their matzevos. Bahana and leave it. Hanach sataraita. What do you mean leave it? Save away. Supposed to burn it. Rather again says Amrabuna Redov ve'achakach surot. Right? So saying so Redov means pursue and then burn. The idea being also that there was a mandate here to conquer the land. So because of the mandate ultimately to conquer the land, therefore again the obligation was not to have Avodah out of commission, destroy the stones, deconstruct them as bechos, but then move forward. Don't take the time ultimately to burn it now. So Rabbanan, Haimi by Leila Oker Loker Avodah Lochavim, the Tzarech L'Shalish Acharel. Those say that Rabbanan ultimately use this concept of teaching that when you uproot Avodah Zarah, it's not just enough to destroy the object, but Tzarech L'Shalish Acharel. What Tzarech L'Shalish Acharel means you have to make sure to remove any vestige of the idolatry. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef, you know the Shalish Acharel Menolet. Where is the rest of the weekend burn? If you have to go ahead and uproot the Avodah Zarah afterwards, not to remain. Ultimately, you learn from the phrase that you shall destroy your name from this place. The idea being that it's not just enough to destroy the idol, not just enough to destroy the beast. You have to rather want us to actively uproot all of the apples of the which again is an incredible use as well. Because it teaches you, let's say that in general, we have to need those also with negative behaviors. So this is an incredible yesod. Somebody check his card, by the way. So I just want to point out. So in this yesod, incredible Musar Hashkafa, which is the same way in Avodah Zarah, that it's not just enough to stop worshiping it or to destroy the Mizbeach or to go in and destroy the idol, but rather again, one of the sharp was Shari Shachara. Plus in the world of negative needles also. We don't have negative needles, no glaveros, no things. It's not just enough to stop the negative character, the negative behavior. It's not with Shari Shachara. Plus everything behavior is rooted in something. Everything negative is rooted in something. It's not just enough to stop the behavior, but a person is served with sharish achara. A person has to go ahead and ultimately again find the third part on Purim. So let's say there's the Koach of Purim. It's very well known. Perhaps again the most quoted piece of Torah when it comes ultimately again to the doctrine of Purim is a statement given to Kunin Zohar. The Kunin Zohar says that Purim is Yom Torah. There's a power of Tshuva today. There's a power ultimately again of the ability to change. There's the power of the ability to go ahead and transform ourselves into something dramatic, something amazing, something something rock it off. Something dramatically amazing. Usually I don't get rattled so I'm used to Hexes. So Purim offers us this incredible and dramatically amazing opportunity for cathartic, comprehensive change. It's like the Shaila is what is Hashem HaKadosh, whatever, says something absolutely amazing. You experience that on Purim is an amazing halakha. The halakha is that Kol HaPoshet Yad knows this. That you know that halakha is in the moment that somebody comes to flesh their credentials. And Purim, the halacha is Kol HaPoshet Yad knows this. If you ask the money you give them, how much you give them, that's up to your discretion. But on Purim you have to give. That's the halacha. Kol HaPoshet Yad knows this. So the Hashem HaKadosh brings also echoes the same so. And Bizarre also writes that the same way that we observe halacha here, so they also observe halacha in Shemayim. If you know, if someone extends their hand with them, so Shemayim is the same exact halacha. Kol HaPoshet Yad, whoever extends the hand, and what's the Hashem tradition, whoever extends their hand to the moments of Ulam, knows. Today, every other day of the year, every other day of the year, so I extend my hands up and I have to earn that extension, so to speak. I have to come up with a with something. The greatness of Purim is the same way that if another Jew asks me for something, no questions asked, I give. So today when I extend my precious hand, when I extend my hand, the Rothschild goes on and this one is so beautiful. He said, this is Milani issue, this is a really treatment in the Gilad. So what do you say? Actually, see that. He said, in Shoshanas Yaakov. What do you say in Shoshanas Yaakov? V'gam charbona zachor l'tov. Even if someone is a charbona, what's a charbona? Charbona is a mushroom because there are children of destroyed. Even if someone is broken, even if someone is corrupted, even if someone is spiritually compromised, v'gam charbona zachor l'tov. Today is the day of Kala Kush's Daniel. Today is the day where we extend our hands on the Sparkle. There is no telling what we could become. There is no telling how we can go. Listen, I know it sounds strange because Purim, we don't think of Purim as a day of Aliyah. We don't think of Purim ultimately as a very spiritual good because there's so much Simcha, and Simcha itself is a little bit like a little holiness. Sometimes it's a little bit of silliness, which is good. That's part of the nature of the day. It's amplified, exaggerated Simcha, and we're running around in the spot, manos, and all beautiful. So it doesn't really seem like a day of incredible concentration. But listen, but it is. So you have to make sure to cut out the time today. Just Shiva, touching the hands, just extend the hands up and close the hands to all. I know I'm not always here, and I know I'm not always connected. I know I'm not always doing the right thing. I'm human being. I have my good days, I have my bad days, I have my peaks, I have my valleys. So today's Purim, I'm here. Today's Purim, I'm going to have one of my secrets. Today's Purim, I'm going to show me the David brother. Today's Purim, I'm going to David myself. Today's Purim, ultimately, I'm going to try to figure out how to be energized and how to be connected to this Purim. And the great promise he had is called a focus that all you need to do is extend your hands up to the Bible, and if you do so, no sin. Yo quería que tú veas que te siga. Yo quería que others who are new to my house, that you know, yo quería que giving of actors of giving to our models. We should make it a day of giving ultimately to ourselves by taking your time. Hopefully, we're not rushing off to work as quickly as we actually go. Or a little bit more time to gap and a little bit more time to take a little bit of time to focus on our Avodas Hashem, to give to ourselves a little bit. Our willingness, most of all, hopefully, we have discussed, to give ourselves up in Sparkle, to give our time up in Sparkle, to give ourselves up in Sparkle, and it's the course of all of that giving that the Sparkle is secretly and this beautiful day, bracha, it's not coming to the almost shower upon us. All whose hours begin as Yisros and Sasinos.
Great Dave Smith is here, ladies and gentlemen. One of our favorites, future presidential candidate.
It's a beautiful doc for us today. Managed to do that. So let's begin. Then, hey, Gary. So although we're not going to begin by quoting the Rebbe, we'll just quote, we'll begin by quoting the Mishnah. So let's begin. So Hanachim ha'ovdim es ha'aretz. So it says, remember again, let's begin. So we're speaking still in the topic of Avodah Zarah, specifically again at what could be rendered Avodah Zarah. So Hanachim ha'ovdim es ha'aretz. So if you have nothing, you learn how to worship a mountain, that's Hakvos, or the hills. Ein mutarim u'mas she'arei rasud. So it says we're going to learn, so inanimate objects that, well, actually define the scope of this. But for our purposes right now, both the mountains, I should say neither the mountains nor the hills can be made into Avodah Zarah. So that which is on the mountain or that which is on the hill can be made into Avodah Zarah, but the mountain or the hill itself cannot. As the Pasuk says, the Pasuk says, you shall not go ahead. Literally, you shall not go ahead and covet. You shall not go ahead and worship the Kesef and Zohar, the gold and the silver which is upon them. So you see over here, there is only that which is upon, only that which is upon the mountain or the hill, not the mountain or the hill itself, which is probably that, which can become a holy Zohar. So the Gemara says, Yosef says, Elohim al Ha'aretz. The Gemara says, Yosef goes to the same pasuk just a different phrase. The pasuk says, Baby Tatun is called the Kamosha Sha'afi Shalagay and Sha'afi Rosham Osam as Elohim al Ha'aretz. Go ahead and destroy your gods on the mountains. So the Gemara of Yosef really dashes Elohim al Ha'aretz, Elohim Elohim. that it's only their gods on the mountains, but the mountains themselves cannot become the gods. Elohim ala gvos, you're not allowed to worship their gods which are on the hills, or gvos Elohim. But the hills themselves cannot become the gods. So what's it? First glance, it appears as if Yosef is saying the same exact thing as the Tanakama. Right? There's no difference between the two of them. Right? So they're both saying the same thing, which is that the mountains, the hills cannot become the Torah. That which is on the mountains, that which is on the hills can, but the mountains and hills themselves cannot. It just seems to be dashing in some different places. The Tanakama says, Lo sachmo kesef zohav aleihem. Ultimately, the Tanakama says, do not covet the gold and silver that is on them, which indicates to us that it is not the mountain or the hill which can become also, but rather only that which is upon them. And Rabbi Yosef really says, Elohim Eloharim, and again, that's Eloharim Elohim. But ultimately, the bottom line being the same, that it's only that which is on the mountain which becomes Asad Avodah, not the mountain itself. I asked the Ram Kasha, on the name of Ashera, Asura. So what about Ashera? What about Ashera? This poses an existential difficulty for us, right? What about the Ashera? So the Ashera, let's remember again, is something that by definition is part of the mixture of the landscape. By definition is part of the earth. Yet again, we see it is Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, using what we just learned before of Losat either Alehem or Elohim Alaharim Elohim, why would that shade be usher? Well, so here we go. Because I will say, literally translated, it has Tisas Yad Adam, literally means like this, today we would say, it has man's fingerprint on it. The idea is that this item has man's involvement. Rashi says, what does this mean, man's involvement? A person planted it. So we'll say, because a person planted it, this is considered to be something created by man. Because it's something created by man, therefore, by definition, it is subject ultimately to being transformed into Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, in other words, what the Mishnah is saying is as follows. Anything that is naturally formed in this world, by definition, cannot be transformed into a substance, an object of Avodah Zarah, even if it is worshipped. So therefore, even if I worship the mountain doesn't become Avodah Zarah. The hill doesn't become Avodah Zarah. Using that logic, and Asherah, right, the Rothschild, which is a tree, which people pray to, which people worship, shouldn't become Avodah Zarah either. Elamai is different variables, right? Because the tree was planted by man. Since the tree was planted by man, this is what the Mishnah calls Tfisa, the Jewish part Tfisas Yukei Adam. The person was involved in this, and the creation of this entity. Therefore, this item can be transformed into an object of Avodah Zarah. The Chosh Yish but Tfisas Yukei Adam Asher. And I will say, whatever ultimately has Tfisas Yukei Adam, whatever was created, at least in part, by man, obviously, the tree in its totality is not created by man. The tree is planted, the tree grows on its own. But for myself, the origin of that tree is something that is done by man. Therefore, by definition, it can be transformed into Avodah Zarah. I'm going to be a Kiva. So the Kiva said as follows. Ani Ovid va'adon lefanach. So the Kiva says, I'm going to dash it. Actually says over here, remember Kiva, Ani Ovid va'adon lefanach. And Farish va'adon lefanach. So Rabbi Kiva says, I'm going to teach you how to dash it in this pasuk properly. How do you dash in the pasuk properly? Chomakim sha'ata motzi ha'gavoa v'giva nisa ve'itra anad da sheyish sham avodah zarah. So also that you don't understand over here as follows. In fact, the that we mentioned before, are in fact going ahead and giving us the markers as to where to find Avodah Zarah. Also, what is that? The pasuk reads, destroy all of the places where the Gentiles went ahead and worshipped idolatry. So, this is the land that you are inheriting. As Elohim al Hafarim Haram, their gods on the tall mountains, Ba'alak Ba'os, and on the hills. And underneath every green tree. So that your Kiva comes along, and the Kiva says, you don't understand. Torah is not just telling you the obligation to describe Avodah Zarah. How do we know that? Because Rabbi Kiva. It's simple. Whenever the Torah goes, it was just coming to describe Avodah Zarah, then what? Coffee line, what's happening back there? A lot of guys over there. So the Torah could have just said, destroy Avodah Zarah. Why do you have to get into on the mountains, on the hills, on the why do you need that? The Kiva says the Torah is actually giving us geographic markers. The Torah is giving us like Avodah Zarah GPS, telling you that by the way you get into Canaan and you have to root out the Avodah Zarah, I'm going to tell you where to find the Avodah Zarah. The Avodah Zarah is on top of the mountains. The Avodah Zarah is on top of the trees. On top of the hills. The Avodah Zarah is often in big green trees. So therefore, again, that Yehuda understands the Torah, the Yehuda love that disagree with that which we mentioned before. I mean, it could be very well agree. We can say this is kind of common that Yossi agree are not disagreeing. Everybody actually seems to be on the same page. It's a beautiful day for this Mishnah. It's important. It's a day of Achim, it's a day of Shalom. A Mishnah without machlokas. A Mishnah without machlokas. Doesn't get better than this. It's like spiritual jackpot. Doesn't get better than this. This is without machlokas on a day of Achim. All that the people are saying is in addition to the halachic ramifications that the Tanakh and Yosef really brought out of the pasuk, there's another piece which is the Tanakh is identifying for us where to find that Avodah Zarah, where to find it out, where to find it in order to do it. Good. So bottom line, what comes out from this is as follows. Leaving aside that you have what comes out from this is as follows. The halacha l'maisa, even if one worships a mountain or a hill, so one does not transform that object into an entity of Avodah Zarah. It is only if one worships that which is on it. By the way, as it is correct, so it's only if one worships that which is on the mountain, that which is on the hill, those objects become Avodah Zarah. Ashira is different. Ashira is the exception. Why? Remember this phrase is in Shirish, but it's actually other. Because it's a person, the concept was involved in the planting of the tree. Therefore, by definition, a person has the ability to transform the identity of the tree into a tefza of Avodah Zarah. Let's say just as an aside, why are they putting the Avodah Zarah on top of the mountain, top of the hills? Because they have that from us. Right, you have to come up to it's halacha, what's the halacha? Shul, right? It's not necessarily to have Avodah Zarah completely on shul, per se, but a shul, usually the halacha says, look at the highest place in the city. Historically, that often did not happen because of anti-Semitic persecution. Jews weren't allowed to do that. But in the back, the halacha is, the Beis Hashem is always supposed to be placed on the highest point in the city. That's what we sort of follow that concept from us as well. Good, thank you, Gemara. Now, Yosef, we have a Tanakama. Oh, so Gemara asks, Arkasha, that Yosef, we and Tanakama are saying the same thing. And we'll say both of them are saying you worship the mountain. You can't make the mountain into Avodah Zarah, but what? You can go ahead and take that which is on the mountain into Avodah Zarah. But we'll say, no. See, we believe in around the Talmud block a couple of times. So we know already that if the Mishnah is teaching you two different opinions, then what? There is something, the machlokas, and you're arguing about something. Because there is only people in Tanakama and Rabbi Yosef in fact are saying the same thing. Rabbi Yosef read the Hayu Tanakama, our Rambam, our Yitzchak, Sipoi Har Kahar Ita Benah. So listen to this interesting afternoon. The afternoon is like the difference between the two. As the machlokas between the two, is what happens if the mountain is covered in gold. Sipoi Har Kahar. Let's say the mountain itself is covered in gold. So the shaila is, let's say that one worships the mountain. So what's the shaila? Good. So the shaila is, what's the status of the covering? Right? So we'll say, is the covering considered to be on the mountain or not? Remember again, why a covering? Because a covering is different than, let's say, a statue sitting on top of the mountain. A statue sitting on top of the mountain is clearly a separate and distinct entity. However, again, pulling on the mountain itself, the shaila is a part of the mountain, and therefore can't be transformed into Avodah Zarah, or is a separate and distinct entity which can be transformed into Avodah Zarah. Tanakama Sabar, the Tanakama holds, Sipoi Har Eno Kehar. Tanakama holds that the covering of the mountain is not like the mountain, and therefore in the sun. And therefore, if you worship it, it mamish becomes avodah zarah. That Yosef really suffer, Sipoy har harin yikar. Yosef really holds that no, covering of the mountain is mamish like what? Mamish like the mountain itself, and therefore even if you worship it, the covering does not become us. Was it typically that's just the moment? Anakama Sarah Sipoy har, Sino Kahar in the San Yosef, Osachmo Kesef Ale. Kosher, so also the Tanakama story is the Pasuk says, Losachmo Kesef Zahav Alei. The Tanakama understands that Pasuk is coming to cover even this case. Even if the Kesef and Zahav is Alei, even if the Kesef and Zahav literally covers the mountain, still nevertheless it is not considered to be. It is considered to be like part of the mountain, and therefore again, I'm sorry, not considered to be part of the mountain, separate than the mountain, and therefore becomes Asr. Rabbi Yossi has Rashi, Rabbi Yossi Saba Sipoi Hadkar, Rabbi Yossi really holds that the covering of the mountain is like the mountain itself. Botol Agabe Har, shows that the covering is bottle to the mountain itself. The Chaban, the Harla of the scope of the mountain can't be turned into a form of idolatry. Sipoi Yami Lobisa. Therefore, the covering also does not become Asr. The Aliyah Mikra Akasiri and Aliyah the Aliyah is not referring to covering, rather the Aliyah is referring to what? Is referring to the idols situated on top of the mountain. But the Gemara suggests, although the Tanakh also means the same thing, the fact that the Korah Magob is receiving mountain is covered in gold, what's the status of the gold? Tanakama holds that it's not like the mountain, therefore it's also that Yosef says it's buckled to the mountain, like the mountain, and therefore Shusha Summer, Shusha says no. Yuchuli how much you point out, you look at her, since Shusha's always been in reality, everyone agrees that the covering of the mountain is not like the mountain. And also ultimately remember, dashing like the Tanakama, that Alehem, Kesef and Shahab, Alehem comes to include not just a separate and distinct idol situated on top of the mountain, but rather what? But even a covering, a gold covering on top of the mountain as well. So what's the machlokes? V'halcha, what's the other days? V'halcha, that's very interesting. V'gilan shenatu ulebasov of Yukamim. Let's say watch this.
And she was like starting to kind of talk about like moving in and getting like really serious. And I was like,
what are the arguments back over there? The issue is as follows. If you planted a tree, and they only began to worship it at some later time. Look at that in just a moment. So I planted a tree, somebody else, right? Moving planted a tree, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, and ultimately again, it only begins to worship it later on. So must remember, the time began piece of an Ashura tree is a tree planted for Avodah Zarah, it's tree from the beginning. In this case over here, I'm going ahead and I'm planting a tree at any specific Kabbalah, and ultimately only begins to worship it later on. So the Gemara says Tanakama Sabra, so the Tanakama holds, so let's actually before we get down to that, Elon Shinatu, Tabrashi, then A on the page 45b, first line. Elon Shinatu, Elon Shimashino, to myself up. The Shaman Tanakama Dama Harley both shows, also the Tanakama says, the announcement that goes on with the Kuwaitin called Yosubahe, Shinakubare. But the high such Kilasa Labo, let's go cover. The 8 civil says, therefore again, Tanakama will say that the tree that is planted not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, just stop it, and the Rabbi comes Avodah Zarah. The tree is about to say, that's just like a mountain. Right? That's what's the case of the mountain. The mountain was there, not for Avodah Zarah, it was just there, and then subsequently worshipped. So Tanakama holds that a tree planted initially for regular purposes, three purposes, and then only later on worshipped is treated like the mountain. Therefore, again, the easy so according to Tanakama, what is the Ashera which is Asr? So Shenatu L'Tchila L'Kach, the Tisas Yad Adam Inokim, Ela Inti L'Tchila Shema Boris Kochadim. About Natu Garin Shol L'Shem Ashera, Inti Tisas Yad Adam, Oil that you say the Lord Dai Shema Boris Kochadim. Haya U'Memad Yilei Mitachas Kol Yisraelan V'Lo Yitzchak. So say Tanakama's of the opinion, essentially the life of the tree is planted initially for stamps purposes, and later on is worshipped as Avodah Zarah. So that tree cannot be transformed into a chefter of Avodah Zarah. Why? Because he knows that at that point in time, that tree is like what? Is like a mounted oriental. What about Sisas Yad Adam? What about the fact that a person was involved in it? Sisas Yad Adam only plays the role when the tree is planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah. But if it was planted for absolute humility, just stamp tree purposes, other arboreal intentions, you can have that one, right? So other right, so then again, Lemaisa, that's not called Tisas Yude Adam Bo. And therefore, the both second is Mutter. On the other hand, let's just read Rashi. That Rashi kind of gives us the whole word. So just read those things for us. Rashi really made that. Rabbi Yosef really comes along to say, Elon Shenatu Gari After the Sholoshim Ashira, Ulabasov Abdu, Aser, Shiros Dami Lahar. So most like also the listener says, no, even if you planted initially for just stam reasons, and then only later on you go ahead and watch, do you worship it? That is not like the mountain or the hill. Why not? So you use but these as the other benefit. So the also listen he says at the end of the day a person created is true. Because a person created ultimately again has the ability to transform one's worship. So we'll say it turns out that according to this approach, actually let's read it inside. But this is the Shesha. So Shesha says, one day arguing about Rachabi, but not to myself, I'll do correct with you. What's the second line in here with this? Tanakama Sabar, even Shemata myself, I'll do Mutter, Tanakama holds, that if she was planted for just stam intention, right? Not about the Zara, just plant the stam, and then only worship afterwards, it is Mutter. Why? Because again, it's Tanakama treats that type of tree like what? Like the mountain or like the hill. What about Isasi de Adambo? Isasi de Adambo Tanakama says it's only a principle applied when the initial planting was done for Avodah Zarah purposes. But Yosef really says no. Elon Shenatu Lubasov Abdu Asher. Yosef really says no. The tree, even if the tree was initially planted just without any specific intention and only worshipped afterwards, nevertheless the tree will still be Asher. Now, both say again, Rabbi Yosef really planted because he owed Isasi de Adambo, a person planted it. So you know, initially there was no intention for Avodah Zarah. Since the intentionality for Avodah Zarah comes later on, therefore halacha mentions that it depends on the identity of the tree, and it is not like the mountain or the hill. Whereas in Nimai, maybe 26, it may not Ashira Asira. Let's remember again, what did the Sefer say? Why is it Ashira? Why is the Ashira tree Asher? It makes use much Isas in the other. Because it will say the Ashira was planted by a person, the Rothschild both Isas in the Adam Asher. And anything that is ultimately has human involvement in its creation, also what they means that anything that has human involvement has the ability to evolve into a chafza of Avodah Zarah, has the ability to transform ultimately into an object of Avodah Zarah. The Choshiyeh both Isas Adam, the Asiyim. And so what is when the Mishnah says anything that has Isas Adam, what does that come to? My love, the Asiyim, Ilan Shenatu, Ulubasov. Does that not come to include this particular case of a tree that initially was planted for just stam tree purposes, and later on ultimately was worshipped? To tell you that such a tree does have the ability to in fact become Asher. The after Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Summer, even Shnatul Lasov up to Asher, and ultimately again even Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds that if a tree was planted initially again it wasn't for stam purposes, and only worship later on, that it has the ability to become Asher. This I know that Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he told so Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says as follows. Mitoch shene'emar Elohim al ha'harim v'lo ha'harim Elohim. So it's another again. Now, just the point to keep in mind. The pasuk itself only quotes the first phrase. The second phrase is the drasha on the pasuk. The first phrase is God coming cloud Yisrael, wipe out all of the Avodah Zarah. Like what? Like Elohim al ha'harim, like their gods on the mountain. So the drasha, the Gemara is v'lo ha'harim Elohim. But the mountains cannot become their gods, which teaches us that we can be transformed in mountain into a chefza of Avodah Zarah. Similarly, the Torah says, Elohim ala gvos, their gods on the hills. And what are we dashing? Below gvos, Elohim. But ultimately, again, the hills cannot become their gods. So I would have said, Shomea Hani, Tachas Ko'itz Ra'anan Elohim, below Ra'anan Elohim. So I would have dashed it. The pasuk says, Tachas Ko'itz Ra'anan, underneath every green tree. I would have put the original of saying that which you find underneath the green trees, because I would say that is Avodah Zarah, below Ra'anan Elohim. But the tree itself cannot become Avodah Zarah. However, therefore the pasuk says, Vashirehem Tisrafun Fire. The Pasuk says, and the Asheros you shall destroy in the fire. Once you seal the other what? Torah explicitly says that the trees are to be destroyed. Ella Tachas Kol Yitzra Anan Lama. Okay, that's the case. Then why do I need that phrase? After I was supposed to understand what's happening over here. The phrase itself is confusing. I understand Es Elohim ala Horit Haronim Ba'ala Gibol. So it basically says, you shall destroy their gods, which are on the mountains and on the hills. That gives me a clear indication that what? That the obligation to destroy Avodah Zarah is that which is on the hill, but not the hill itself. Even if the hill itself is worship, even if the mountain itself is worship. Yet when it comes to Asherah, what does the Torah say? Parachas kol Yitzra'ana. Why use the notion of parachas? Parachas means what? Underneath the tree. So okay, I would have thought that what is the Torah telling me? The tree itself cannot become Avodah Zarah, but the idols underneath the trees can. But one section, the Torah itself says, Vashrei Tisrafun Ba'is. The Torah itself says that what? You have to destroy the Asherah. Which tells me what? That the Asherahs can become Avodah Zarah. So what's going on? So if that's the case, the Asherahs can become Avodah Zarah. So then why use lesson of Achas Kol Yitzra Anan? Ahu L'Chidnari. Let's say that's come to teach us again, Rabbi. What is that Rabbi saying? Rasa, Ahu L'Chidnari. Let me get an Akiva. And he's open for us all the fun out. And when you're listening to the Mishnah, and the Akiva came along and he said, I'll dash the Pasuk to you. Come back and chat about the Agabah, the given a song. The Akiva says, correct, the Moshe was telling us in the commentaries, and he puts you find a high mountain or a high hill, the Israel or a tree. That's the travel is so high. No, I won't say that. What? No, there's Avodah Zarah. I won't say it's so fascinating. Those who know left Avodah Zarah was in Iran, the first time we started yesterday. See the mountain, there's Avodah Zarah. See the hill, there's Avodah Zarah. See the trees, there's Avodah Zarah. The Rabbanon, Hi Hashem, Tifun Ba'is, my happiness. So what does the Rabbanon do with the phrase, the Hashem, Tifun Ba'is? Like what you did do with this phrase. And you must be violate, you even say not to make food all the time. Because they understand this to me, what this is a reference to, a tree initially planted for Avodah Zarah, for Avodah Zarah purposes. So it was Rabbi Yossi that you did not mean violate law. Rabbi Yossi that you also need that process to teach me on both sides. That strange is the age to teach me that if a tree was initially planted for Avodah Zarah purposes, then what? Then the mice again it's Aser. So where is the Rabbi? The mice says, Rabbi Yossi, we did not mean violate law. How can I mean? Now, we're looking at a situation where we'll call it trunk, where the initial tree is mutter, but that which subsequently grows is going to be Aser. Where can you have a case like that? Rabbi Omer, even Shenatu Ulabasov. Was it that refers to a case of a tree that was initially planted, and then what? And then ultimately again was later on to the level of the drug. So let's just look at this structure one more time. If you say we understand, you said we don't understand the phrase Asherim to God they did. So those are the two speaking by Asheris. One tells me Asherim to certain rights, burning Asheris. The other part says Asherim to God they cut down the Asheris. Now, why do I need cut down and burn? It's only burn. If I say burn, it's pretty clear. I burn means clearly interpret that multiple ways, right? You need to destroy it. So I need to cut it down. Now, if you don't see a really sexual fascinating, this is because it's a piece of an Asherah tree, which doesn't need to be burnt down. Which is that case? That's a case of an Asherah tree which is planted for a stop purposes, subsequently worshipped. So we'll say what becomes Aser. Now, again, this means we're talking to tomorrow's doctor, we're going to see more. But what happens over here in a case like that is it appears that only that which grows after the Avodah Zarah designation, in fact, becomes Aser as Avodah Zarah. So if I go, so if a person worships an Asherah, she was planted for stop purposes, a person worships it, only that which grows after the point of Avodah Zarah designation ultimately becomes Avodah Zarah. That's why once it says Asherah to God, and in that kind of case, you have to destroy the tree. No, what do you have to do? You have to cut off whatever grew after the Avodah Zarah designation. I'll assume you're able to measure that in some way. So therefore, it's two different sutras referring to two different cases. And therefore, it's really says that here's a clear line that even if she initially planted for mundane purposes, and subsequently worshipped as Avodah Zarah, will in fact be is us. So the Gemara says, so Azu H should be do also the current. Also, what is the case ultimately again of the tree? When the primary part is mutter, and only that which is cut off or that which grows afterwards is going to be mutter. So the Gemara says, "Had the only even stuff with myself off." I the Hashem is the point that is kanasava. Tamuda. You see what's about what's happening, but we're talking about the Gemara's reading the pasuk. The Gemara's reading the pasuk. Hashem is the point by Rashi right across. Hashem is the point by Nasi. But we also have Yehuda Tamuda and Nosei. Well, the Mesa even stuff with myself off. So the Gemara, so Hashem even lo nemas. What's to this? But yet the Gemara is bringing the pasuk of Hashem is the point by not the pasuk of Hashem Tigadeu, which was even lo nemas. What's here's how the Gemara. Even lo nemas is the point by had the pasuk not said you have to burn the Asherah, and you see Omer Hashem Tigadeu, I would have said you have to cut down the Asherah. What is that talking about? The Ilan Shenatu Mitfila Lekach. I would have assumed that would see had the Torah not said Hashem discipline Ra'ish, and all it would have said is Hashem Tigadeu. I would have assumed that is referring to a tree which is initially planted for Avodah Zarah. Lekach, Hashta Discipline Hashem discipline Ra'ish was a now that we have two psukim Hashem discipline Ra'ish birthing Tigadeu. Therefore, both sides actually Hashem Asherehem. Ashrim discipline Ra'ish. That's the simple case, which therefore again has to be destroyed. So now what do I do with the extra pasuk of Ashrim Tigadeu? Oh, I can tell you, Ashrim Tigadeu and the Ilan Shenato Ulabasov Avu. Also, it comes to teaching about a tree which was initially planted for regular purposes and subsequently worshipped. Then Gemara says, "My Avile is that you're still I'm sorry. Rabbanan, hi Hashem Tigadeu me'Avile." Listen, this is nice. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we can initially for mundane purposes, and then subsequently worshiping, that the tree becomes usher as Avodah Zarah. So the learning it out from the phrase Hashem Tigadeu is fantastic. What about according to the Rabbanan, the Tanakh, who holds that we'll say you plant the tree initially for regular purposes, and then what? And then worshiping, that the tree remains mutter, that the tree does not transform into Avodah Zarah. So what do they do with the phrase Hashem Tigadeu? This is amazing. Hashem Tigadeu my Avile, the Tigadeu Shomelei. This is amazing. They use it for the Joshua Shomelei. What is the Shomelei? So Shomelei, we do it Avodas Kochavim, Kodman L'Kibush Eretz Yisrael. Kibush Eretz Yisrael, Kodem L'Kibush Avodas Kochavim. This is amazing. So the Shomelei holds that in the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, there were two steps in the destruction of Avodah Zarah. The first step was cutting down the Avodah Zarah. Like literally, he's cutting it down, the idols, knocking it over. But then the primary objective was the conquering and capturing of Eretz Yisrael. After Eretz Yisrael was conquered and captured, then what? Then they went back and destroyed the Avodah Zarah. It was amazing. So what happens again? You do it on the Kodman L'Kibush. So the knocking down of the cutting down of Avodah Zarah, that preceded the conquering of the land. As they're rolling through the land, so ultimately they're going to have to cut down, push down, knock over whatever they can. But they can't spend the time destroying them. Because right now, again, it has to be kibush. So however, kibush Eretz Yisrael Kodim L'Kibush. Also, the conquering of the land has to precede ultimately the destruction of Avodah Zarah. You do it in Rashi this moment. You do it over this Kodim L'Kibush Eretz Yisrael. Rashi says, if we sasa yitzkavu l'gadol miyam. When we enter into the land, we were obligated to go ahead and what? We were obligated to go ahead and cut down the Avodah Zarah immediately. And after we conquer it, then you go back and you upgrade. So it's like, it's an incredible yesod in life. Sometimes, again, in the world of accomplishment, there are different ways that a person has to pursue goals. Sometimes, a person has to focus on finishing one goal at a time. And sometimes the person has to go ahead and pursue a number of different life initiatives, recognizing that right now they're all about 70%. Right now they're about 70%, but I need traction keep going forward, and I'll find the time ultimately to fill in the remaining 30% as well. It's not a right or a wrong mahalik in life. My mistake depends on what's happening. So again, the goal was Avodah Zarah to be knocked out of finish. So come in, cut it down, knock it down. But the goal over here is keep it. The goal over here is to conquer the land. Destroying Avodah Zarah, especially this volume of Avodah Zarah, will take you a lot of time. Go as it stands. Remember again, people should feel it takes 14 years. So first go ahead and conquer the land, knock down Avodah Zarah as you're going through it, conquer it, then go back and destroy it. So the Gemara goes like this. Gemara goes like this. You start circling the Torah. Kind of Yosef. You touch them Mishpachosam. So what's it as now again? Still sitting topic. As the Yosef says, you shall go as little and destroy them as Mishpachos. Bahana. So actually, they touch them. What's it? They touch them. Deconstruct. You deconstruct. They touch them. You will deconstruct them as Mishpachos. Bahana. And leave it. You should back them as Matzevosam. Break their Matzevos. Bahana. And leave it. What do you mean? Straight away, supposed to burn it. Rather again, says right? Those saying so Ridov means pursue and then burn. The idea being also that there was a mandate here to conquer the land. So because of the mandate ultimately to conquer the land, therefore again the obligation was knock the Avodah Zarah out of commission, destroy the stones, deconstruct the Mizbechos, but then move forward. Don't take the time ultimately to burn it now. So Rabbanon, Hani by Leila Oker Avodah Zarah, Shetak B'Shalish Achareh. Those say the Rabbanon ultimately use this concept to teach you that when you uproot Avodah Zarah, it's not just enough to destroy the object. Shetak B'Shalish Achareh. Also, Shalish Achareh means you have to make sure to remove any vestige of the idolatry. So the Gemara says, Yosef, you use the Shalish Achareh Menore. Where the Yosef we've been learning that you have to go ahead and uproot the Avodah Zarah afterwards. Ultimately, you learn from the phrase that you shall destroy their name from this place. The idea being that it's not just enough to destroy the idol, not just enough to destroy the shaft, but rather you want us to actively uproot all of the Avodah Zarah. Also, which again is an incredible use sort of well, because it teaches you that in general we have to see those also. So negative behavior. I got a mazel tov. So this is an incredible yesod. Somebody check this card, by the way. So I just want to point out. So in this yesod, incredible Musar Hashtafa, which is also the same way in Avodah Zarah, that it's not just enough to stop worshiping it or to destroy the Mizbeach or to go and destroy the idol, but rather again, one of the charts was Shari Shachara, also in the world of negative midos also. You don't have negative midos, you don't have things. It's not just enough to stop the negative character, the negative behavior. The chart was Shari Shachara. Plus, every behavior is rooted in something. Everything negative is rooted in something. It's not just enough to stop the behavior, but a person is starting with Sharish Achara. That person has to go ahead and ultimately again find the church part by Purim. So let's say there's perhaps given those 40 pieces of children, it comes ultimately again to the depths of Purim. The Kohen says that Purim is Yom Purim. If there's a power of Shuvah today, if there's a power ultimately again of the ability to change, there's the power of the ability to go ahead and transform ourselves into something dramatic, something amazing, something something dramatically amazing. Okay. Usually I don't get rattled so much. I'm used to hecklers. So Purim offers us this incredible and dramatically amazing opportunity for cathartic, comprehensive change. So it's like, Shaila is what is Hashem the Rebbe says something absolutely amazing. And he explains that on Purim is an amazing halacha. The halacha is that kol haposhek yad inosu. That you know that halacha is under normal circumstances, somebody comes to collect their credentials. On Purim, the halacha is kol haposhek yad inosu. A Jew asks, the money you give them, how much you give them, that's up to your discussion. But on Purim, you have to give. That's the halacha. Kol haposhek yad inosu. So Hashem but needs to also actually the same story. So Izar also writes that the same way that we observe halacha here, so the Rothschild observes halacha in Shemayim as well.
It really tastes
someone
much
extends
better.
their hand to give them, Shemayim is
It's
whoever extends their hand, and what sort of Hashem that is, the hand, whoever extends their hands to the Rebbe knows. Today, every other day of the year, even Yom Kippur, every other day of the year, so I extend my hands up and sparkle. I have to earn that extension, so to speak. I have to come up with something. The greatness of Purim is the same way that if another Jew asks me for something, no questions asked, I give. So today, when I extend my precious hand, when I extend my hand, the Rothschild goes on, it's so beautiful. He says, this is this is alluded to in the Megillah itself. What do we say? Actually, say in Shoshanas Yaakov. What do we say in Shoshanas Yaakov? V'gam charvona zochor leto. Even if someone is a charvon, what's charvona? Charvona is from Lashon, the shortage of chara, of destroy. Even if someone is broken, even if someone is shipwrecked, even if someone is spiritually compromised, v'gam charvona zochor leto. Today is the day of Kala Kosh's diagnosis. Today is the day where we extend our hands up and spark you. There is no telling what you can become. There is no telling how we can go. I know it sounds strange because Purim, often don't think of Purim as a day of Aliyah. We don't think of Purim ultimately as a day of spiritual growth because there's so much Simcha, and Simcha itself is a little bit like a little holocaust. Sometimes it's a little bit of silliness, which is good. That's part of the nature of the day. Amplified exactly in Simcha. And we're running around in Manos and all beautiful. So just we seem like a day of incredible concentration. But it is. So you have to make sure to cut out the time today. Just give our conscious hands to just extend the hands like a person. I know I'm not always good. I know I'm not always connected. I know I'm not always doing the right thing. I'm human being. I have my good days, I have my bad days, I have my peaks, I have my valleys. Today's Purim, today's Purim, I have one of the my teachers. Today's Purim goes from being a Gavi brother. Today's Purim was Gavi to myself. Today's Purim ultimately I'm going to try to figure out how to be energized and how to be connected with God. And the great promise we have is called Kosh's Yad. All we need to do is extend the hands of the horrible. And if you do so, no sneeze. Zoch to the Hashem to make it to see. Zoch to make it to others who are new to my house. Zoch to Hashem to make it of Achtus of the Manos. We should make it a day of giving ultimately to ourselves by keeping the time. Ultimately, we're not rushing off to work as quickly as we have to go at home. Only a little bit more time to gap, a little bit more time to stay to it, a little bit of time to focus on our Avodas Hashem, to give to our souls a little bit. Our looking is most of all, we will discuss our self-centered sparkle, our time of our sparkle, our self-centered sparkle, and because of all of that sparkle is beautiful day. Rabbi, now we're upon us, all we shall continue and give us and sustain.
I am a stripper. Wow, that's very quick. Redman knew that somehow.
It's beautiful dance and I'm just going to talk to you down. So let's begin. Then hey, so although we're not going to begin by quoting the Rebbe, we'll just close with begin by quoting the Mishnah. So let's begin. So Hanachim Ma'okim as the heart. So let's say, remember again, let's begin. So we're speaking still in the topic of Avodah Zarah, specifically again at what could be rendered Avodah Zarah. So Hanachim Ma'okim as the heart. So if you have nothing, you can how to worship a mountain. That's how close, or the hills. In Torah, so it says we're going to learn. So inanimate objects that actually we define the scope of this. But for our purposes right now, both the mountains, your Torah is saying the mountains or the hills can be made into Avodah Zarah. So that which is on the mountain or that which is on the hill can be made into Avodah Zarah, but the mountain or the hill itself cannot. As the pasuk says, "Osachol kesef v'zohav alei." The pasuk says, "You shall not go ahead." Literally, you shall not go ahead and covet. You shall not go ahead and worship the kesef and zohav, the gold and the silver which is upon them. You see over here, there's only that which is upon, only that which is upon. upon the mountain or the hill, not the mountain or the hill itself, in each property that would become a holy zone. So the Gemara says, Yosef Reed says, Elohim al Mahari. So I'll say, Yosef goes, it's the same person, just a different place. The person says, Abed Kadun is calling the Moshe Sha'ati Shalagayim and Sha'ati Yoshim Osam, as Elohim al Mahari. Go ahead and destroy your gods on the mountains. So the Gemara that Yosef Reed dashes, Elohim al Mahari, Elohim Elohim. That it's only their gods on the mountains, but the mountains themselves could not become the gods. Elohim ala Givos, you're not allowed to worship their gods which are on the hills, but Elohim. But the hills themselves cannot become the gods. So what's it? At first glance, it appears that Rabbi Yosef is saying the same exact thing as the Tanakh. Right? There's no difference between the two. Right? So they're both saying the same thing, which is that the mountains, the hills cannot become Zara. That which is on the mountains, that which is on the hills can, but the mountains and hills themselves cannot. You just seem to be dashing it from different places. The Tanakh says, Lo sachmo kesef zohab aleihem. Ultimately, the Tanakh says, do not covet the gold and silver that is on them, which indicates to us that it is not the mountain or the hill which can become also, but rather only that which is upon them. And Rabbi Yosef, he says, Elohim Elohim, and again, that is Elohim Elohim. But ultimately, the bottom line being the same, that it's only that which is on the mountain which becomes Hasadah or Zara, not the mountain itself. I asked the Mishnah, Bam Kasha, Omidnei Ma'ashera Asura. So it says, what about Asherah? What about Asherah? This poses an existential difficulty for us, right? What about the Asherah? So the Asherah, let's remember again, is something that by definition is part of the mixture of the landscape. By definition is part of the earth. Yet again, we see it is Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, using what we just learned before, Rosati Aleihem or Elohim Alaharim Elohim, why would Asherah be Asher? Well, so here we go. Because the most literally translated, it has Tfisas Yad Adam, literally like yesterday we say, it has man's fingerprints on it. The idea is that this item has man's involvement. Rashi says, what does this mean, man's involvement? Sha'adam not a person planted it. So we'll say, because a person planted it, this is considered to be something created by man. Because it's something created by man, therefore, by definition, it is subject ultimately to being transformed into Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, in other words, what's interesting to say is as follows. Anything that is naturally formed in this world, by definition, cannot be transformed into an object of Avodah Zarah, even if it is worship. So therefore, even if I worship the mountain doesn't become Avodah Zarah. The hill doesn't become Avodah Zarah. I'm using that logic, and Asherah, right, so also which is a tree, which people pray to, which people worship, shouldn't become Avodah Zarah either. Elamai trees different by Avodah Zarah, because the tree is planted by man. The tree is planted by man. Since the tree is planted by man, this is what the Mishnah calls Tfisa Yeveshiyish, but Tfisas Yivei Adam. The person was involved in this, and the creation of this entity. Therefore, this item can be transformed into an object of Avodah Zarah. The Chosh Yish, but Tfisas Yivei Adam also. And I will say, whatever ultimately has Tfisas Yivei Adam, whatever was created, at least in part, by man, obviously, the tree is totality is not created by man. It grows on its own, but the license, the origin of that tree is something that is done by man. Therefore, by definition, it can be transformed into Avodah Zarah. I'm going to be a keeper. So the keeper says as follows. Ani Odin va'odon lefana. So the keeper says, I'm going to dash and as he says over here, remember to that, Ani Odin va'odon lefanecha, and Farish va'odon lefanecha. So the keeper says, I'm going to teach you how to dash in this pasuk properly. How do you dash in the pasuk properly? Mamakum sha'ata motzi ha'gavoa v'giva nisa ve'itz ra'anad. God should some Avodah Zarah. Those that the Akiva understands over here as follows. And in fact, the teaching that we mentioned before, are in fact going ahead and giving us the markers as to where to find Avodah Zarah. Also, what is that? The pasuk reads, "Atein kavinas kalam etamot asher avu shel Adonai." Destroy all of the places where the Gentiles went ahead and worshipped idolatry. So I see Yerushalayim. This is the land of Shalom. As Elohim al Hakorim Haram. Their gods on the tall mountains, Ba'alak Ba'osan on the hills. The Tachas Kol Itzla Anan. Every what's it? Itzla Anan. Every green tree. So that Yehuda comes along. And Yehuda says, "You understand? Torah is not just telling you the obligation to describe all the gods. How do you know that? Because of Yehuda. It's simple. Every Torah goes to just coming to describe all the gods. Then what? Copyright, what's happening back there? A lot of guys over there. So the Torah could have just said, describe all the Torah. Why do you have to get into on the mountains, on the hills, on the trees? Why do you need that? That Yeshiva says the Torah is actually giving us geographic markers. So it's giving us like a Avodah Zarah GPS, telling you that by the way, you journey to Canaan, and you have to root out the Avodah Zarah. I'm going to tell you where to find the Avodah Zarah. The Avodah Zarah is on top of the mountain. The Avodah Zarah is on top of the trees. On top of the hills. The Avodah Zarah is often the complete green trees. So therefore, again, that Yeshiva understands the Torah. So the keep it rubbed down to disagree with that which we mentioned before. I mean, it could be very well agreed. We could say this is the kind of hammer that you see. Agreed or not? Everybody actually sees in the Mishnah. They will say, it's a beautiful day for this Mishnah. It's very much good. A Mishnah without machlokes. A Mishnah without machlokes. It doesn't get better than this. It's like spiritual jackpot. It doesn't get better than this. Mishnah without machlokes on a day of Achos. All that you're saying is in addition to the halachic ramifications that the kind of camera that Yosef really brought out of the process, there's another piece which is the Torah which is identifying for us where to find that Avodah Zarah, where to find it out, where to find it, in order to really first. Listen, so bottom line, what comes up in the says as follows. Reading the side that you have what comes up in the says as follows. There are local myself, even if one worships a mountain or a hill, so one does not transform that object into an entity of Avodah Zarah. It is only if one worships that which is on the by the way, so it's only if one worships that which is on the mountain, that which is on the hill, those objects become Avodah Zarah. Ashira is different. Ashira is the exception. Why? Remember this phrase is Shinish, but he's actually the other. Because it's a person that constantly was involved in the planting of the tree. Therefore, by definition, the person has been able to transform the identity of the tree into a chapter of Avodah Zarah. Was it just as an aside? Was it the logic? Why are they putting the Avodah Zarah on top of the mountain, on top of the hills? You got that from us. You got that from us. Remember, again, it's halacha. Shul, right? Because they start saying the Avodah Zarah predated our shuls per se, but a shul, by definition, by how halacha says, it's also the highest place in the city. Historically, that often did not happen because of anti-Semitic persecution. People weren't allowed to do that. But in the fact that the halacha is, the base Hashem is always supposed to be placed on the highest place in the city. That will be the follow the concept of us as well. Good says the Gemara that Yosef is a Tanakama. Oh, so the Gemara asks our Kasha that Yosef really Tanakama are saying the same thing. I will say both of them are saying you worship the mountain. You can't make the mountain into Avodah Zarah, but what? You can go ahead and take that which is on the mountain into Avodah Zarah. But I will say no. We really put around the Talmud block a couple of times. So we know already that if the Mishnah is teaching you different opinions than what? There is a machlok when you're arguing about something. Because the Israel is going to come and I was in fact the same thing. You say read the Hayy Tanakama, our Rambam, our Ishlakish, simply hard to hide each other. But so this is interesting after me. The Nafmir is like the difference between the two. And the machlok is between the two. What happens if the mountain is covered in gold? Simply hard to hide. Let's say the mountain itself is covered in gold. So the Shaila is, let's say that one worships the mountain. So what's the Shaila? Good. Excellent. So the Shaila is, what's the status of the cover? Right? The most is the covering is considered to be part of the mountain or not. Remember again, why a covering? Because a covering is different than, let's say, a statue sitting on top of the mountain. A statue sitting on top of the mountain is clearly a separate and distinct entity. However, again, the coin on the mountain itself, the Sila is a part of the mountain, and therefore can't be transformed into Rabbi Zara, or is a separate and distinct entity which can't be transformed into Rabbi Zara. Tanakama Sabbath, Tanakama holds, C4 Yahar, Eno Kehar. Tanakama holds that the covering of the mountain is not like the mountain, and therefore, Umissa. And therefore, if we worship it, the mamish becomes Avodah Zarah. That Yosef Libi Saber, C4 Har Harim Kehar. Yosef holds that no, covering of the mountain is mamish like what? Mamish like the mountain itself, and therefore, even if we worship it, the covering does not become us. What's the figure of the Dash for the moment? Tanakama Sarat C4 Har Eno Kehar Musa. He said, Losachmos Kesef Haleh. Kosher, so also the Tanakama story is the person says, Losachmos Kesef Mizahav Aleh. The Tanakama understands that person is covered even in this case. Even if the Kesef and Zav is Aleh, even if the Kesef and Zav literally covers the mountain, still nevertheless will not consider to be. It is considered to be like part of the mountain, and therefore again, I'm sorry, not considered to be part of the mountain, separate from the mountain, and therefore becomes possible. And Yossi has not the Yossi Saban Sipoi Hashad, the Yossi really holds that the covering of the mountain is like the mountain itself. But all agabe has shows that the covering is bundled to the mountain itself. The Chayvan the Harla of the scope of the mountain can't be turned into a form of idolatry. Sipoi Nani Logisha. Therefore, the covering also does not become us. The Aliyah Bikra Akasilik Elohim Solution Claim. So let's talk about the Aliyah. The Aliyah is not referring to covering, but the Aliyah is referring to what? Is referring to the idols situated on top of the mountain. Therefore, Tzimara suggests, although the Tanakama is using the same thing, the fact that the part of the Makotis is Sipoi High. Mountain is covered in gold. What's the status of the gold? Tanakama holds that it's not like the mountain, therefore it's usher. The real series says it's bundled to the mountain, like the mountain, and therefore Shesha Summer. Shesha says no. The Chuli Halma, Sipoi Har, Inokehar. If Shesha holds, then in reality, everyone agrees that the covering of the mountain is not like the mountain. I will say, ultimately, remember, Dashing like the Tanakama, that Aleihem, Kesef, and Zahab, Aleihem comes to include not just a separate and distinct idol situated on top of the mountain, but rather what? But even a covering, a gold covering on top of the mountain as well. So what's the matter? The Halcha was the other days. The Halcha is actually very interesting. The Ilan Shenati Ulabasov of you coming. So say, watch this. Watch this. So what are they arguing about over here? The issue is as follows. If you planted a tree, and you only began to worship it at some later time. We'll get back to this in a moment. You learn Shalom B'Shem HaShem. So I planted a tree. Somebody else, right? Moving planted a tree, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, not for the sake of Avodah Zarah. And ultimately, again, he only begins to worship it later on. So also remember, the time began to piece of a tree is a tree planted for Avodah Zarah from the beginning. In this case over here, I'm going ahead and I'm planting the tree that only specific Kabbalah, and ultimately only begin to worship it later on. So the Gemara says Tanakama Summer, so the Tanakama holds Eva. So we'll say actually before we get to that, look at Rashi just a moment. Eva Shinatu, Shab Rashi, then A on the base 45b, first line. Eva Shinatu, Shlomi Shemashera, who myself up. The Shama the Tanakama don't have hardly both shows. So what's like the Tanakama who says, and now kids and those are with the correct being called Yotzi Bahem. The Kubarim, although Haisa Kurasa Lavodas go coming. The eight several says therefore again, the Tanakama will say that the tree that is planted not for the sake of Avodah Zarah initially. The stomach tree, the Milah becomes Avodah Zarah. The tree is about to say that's just like a mountain. Right? What's the case of the mountain? The mountain was there. Not for Avodah Zarah, was just there. But then subsequently worshipped. So Tanakama holds that a tree planted initially for regular purposes, three purposes, and then only later on worshipped is treated like a mountain. Therefore, again, there is so according to Tanakama, what is the Ashira which is Asher? The the Tvisas Yad Adam Enoch ela inkim the Shema Bolis Kohamis. About not to Garin Shola Shemashira, inkim Tvisas Adam, oil that is shite and not dice Bolis Kohamis. Hayakum Mahdi lay Takas Kol Itzanan Velo Itzanan. So say Tanakamas of the opinion, that since the life of the trees planted initially just for shanty purposes, and later on is worshipped as Avodah, so that tree cannot be transformed into a chapter of Avodah. Why? Because he knows that at that point in time, that tree is like what? Is like a mountain oracle. What about Tvisas Yad Adam? What about the fact that a person was involved in it? Tvisas Yad Adam only plays a role when the tree is initially planted for the sake of Avodah. But if it was planted for absolute just stamp tree purposes, other arboreal intentions, we have that one, right? So then again, Lemaisa, that's not called Tvisas Adam bowl, and therefore you're both saying it's mutter. On the other hand, let's just read Rashi. That Rashi can give us the whole word. So just read no see more. Rashi will say really made that. Rabbi Yosef really comes along to say, Ilan Shenatu Gari Akilu Sholosh Yemashira, Ulabasof Avdu, Aser Hello, Dami Lahar. Someone said, ultimately, the says no. Even if you planted in the tree for just some reason, and then only later on you go ahead and what? You worship it. That is not like the mountain or the hill. Why not? So Yesh but Tvisas the other Benetia. Because also basically you says at the end of the day a person created this tree. Because a person created it, ultimately again has the ability to transform Avodah once worship. So we'll say it turns out that according to this approach, actually that's the evening side. No, this is Rav Sheshes. Says, what are they arguing about? Let's say second line on him with base. Tanakama Sagar, Elon Shemata Lubasov of the water. Tanakama holds that the tree was planted for just stam intentions. Right? Not about the Zara. Just planted stam. And then only worship afterwards, it is mutter. Why? Because again, the Tanakama treats that type of tree like what? Like the mountain or like the hill. What about Tvisas Adam Bo? Tvisas Adam Bo, Tanakama says, is only a principle applied when the initial planting was done for Avodah purposes. Rabbi Yosef really says no. Elon Shenat Ulabasof Avdu Aser. Rabbi Yosef really says no. The tree, even if the tree was initially planted just stam, without any specific intention, and only worshipped afterwards, nevertheless, the tree will still be Aser. And we'll say again, Rabbi Yosef really planted because he knows Tvisas Adam Bo, a person planted this. So you know, there was no intention for Avodah, since the intentionality for Avodah comes later on. Therefore, halacha like that you can transform the identity of the tree, and it is not like the mountain or the hill. So the Gemara says, Nimai, Midikoni Sefer, Mitnei Ashera Asura. So remember again, what did the Sefer say? Why is an Ashera? Why is the Ashera tree Asura? If they should but Tvisas the other, because it also says the Ashera was planted by a person. The Chosh Yish both Tvisas the Adam Asura. And anything that is ultimately has human involvement in its creation, which means that anything that has human involvement has the ability to evolve into a chapter of Avodah, has the ability to transform ultimately into an object of Avodah. The Chosh Yesh both Tvisas Adam, La'asiyim. So when the Mishnah says anything that has Tvisas Adam, what does that come to include? My love, La'asiyim Ilan Shenatu Ulubasov Adam. Does that not come to include this particular case of a tree that initially was planted for just stamp tree purposes, and later on ultimately was worshipped? To tell you that such a tree does have the ability to exactly become usher. So after Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Summer, even Shnatul Lavasov after usher, and ultimately against even Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda holds that if a tree was planted initially, again it wasn't for stamp purposes, and only worshipped later on, that it has the ability to become usher. He signed up Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, so Rabbi Yossi Yehuda says as follows: Mitoch shene'emar Eloheim al ha'arim v'lo ha'arim Elohim. So let's remember again, now the different parts to keep in mind. The pasuk itself only quotes the first phrase. The second phrase is the drasha on the pasuk. The first phrase is God telling Klal Yisrael, wipe out all of the Avodah, like what? Like Elohim al ha'arim, like their gods on the mountain. The drasha, the Gemara is v'lo ha'arim Elohim, but the mountains cannot become their gods, which teaches us that you can't transform a mountain into a chapter of Avodah. Similarly, the Torah says, Elohim ala kavos, their gods on the hills. And what do we mention? Below haslo, below kavos, Elohim. And ultimately, again, the hills cannot become their gods. So I would have said, Shomea Hani, Tachas Kol Itz Ra'anan Elohim, below Ra'anan Elohim. So I would have done the pasuk says, Tachas Kol Itz Ra'anan, underneath every green tree. I would have thought that wasn't going to say that which you find underneath the green trees, there, that is Avodah Zarah, below Ra'anan Elohim. The tree itself cannot become Avodah Zarah. Therefore, the pasuk says, Bashureim Tishrafim Ephraim. The pasuk says, "And the Asheros you shall destroy in the fire." It's supposed to be sealed into the blood. Torah explicitly says that the trees are to be destroyed. Ela tachas kol Yisra'anan Lama. We're supposed to say that's the case. Then why do I need that phrase? Tachas. We'll say you understand what's happening over here. The phrase itself is confusing. Meaning, I understand as Elohim ala Horsi. Aramim va'ala Kavos. So it says, "You shall destroy their gods which are on the mountains and on the hills." That gives me a clear indication that what? That the obligation to destroy Avodah Zarah is that which is on the hill, but not the hill itself. Even if the hill itself is worship, even if the mountain itself is worship. Yet, when it comes to Asherah, what does the Torah say? Parachas kol Yitzra'ana. Why is that like the parachas? Parachas means what? Underneath the tree. So, okay, I would have thought that what is the Torah telling me? The tree itself cannot become Avodah Zarah, but the idols underneath the trees can. But one second, the Torah itself says, Vashrei is the one page. The Torah itself says that what? You have to destroy the Asherah. It tells me what? It tells me what? That the Asherahs can become. The Asherahs can become Avodah Zarah. So what's going on? So if that's the case, the Asherahs can become Avodah Zarah. So then why use Lashon of Hachas Kol Yitzra'anan? Ahu V'Chidani. Or say that's come to people to Rabbi. What does Rabbi Akiva say? Listen, Ahu V'Chidani. Let me get Akiva. And he opened the Adon Lefanah. So you already must explain the Mishnah. And the Akiva came along and said, I'll dash the Pasuk. Come back, come back, come back, come back, and give it a song. And the Akiva says, correct, the Muslim is telling us, commentaries can. Any place that you find a high mountain or a high hill, the Israel or a green tree, that's the Israel on the slope of it. The other one says, what? No, it's not going to be done. So it's so fascinating. You know, how rapid Abu Zora was in Sudan. That's how we start getting it. That's it. That literally, again, as the Church Bible says, see a mountain, there's a Abu Zora. See a hill, there's a Abu Zora. See the trees, there's a Abu Zora. Not Abu Zora. The Rabbanon, I say the Rabbanon, high action, what is my action? So what did Rabbanon do with the phrase, the Ashrei Tzidkei? Like what did they do with this phrase? So you must violate the Yiva Sheinatu Miskila Lekah. Because if they understand this meaning, what did it be a reference to? A tree initially planted for Avodah Zarah, for Avodah Zarah purposes. So you want to Yossi, the Yudim Yamin Violate. But this is you also need that pasuk to teach me on both sides. Lashem is the point that it should teach me that if a tree was initially planted for Avodah Zarah purposes, then what? Then Lamai said that it's Aser. So we're just learning that out, bro. Lamai says, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Nami Bar Leila. Hakanami. Now we're going to have a situation where we'll call it trunk, where the initial tree is water, but that which subsequently grows is going to be Aser. Where can you have a case like that? Rabbi Omer, Elon Shenatu Ulabasov of. We'll say that refers to a case of a tree that was initially planted. And then what? And then ultimately again was later on to each level of results. We'll say let's just look at this question one more time. But Yosef really understood Yosef's here. Yosef you don't understand the phrase Asherim Tigadim. So we'll say we're speaking by Asherim. One tells me Asherim is spoken by burning the Asherim. The other part says Asherim Tigadim. Cut down the Asherim. Now, why do I mean both cut down and burn? It's only burn. We'll say burn is pretty clear. Right? Burn is you can interpret that multiple ways, right? It means destroy it. So I think don't cut it down. Now, you'll see the leaf says in fashion, he says because it's something that which doesn't need to be burnt down. Which is that case? That's a case of an Asherah tree which is planted for stamp purposes, subsequently worship. So we'll say what becomes Aser. Now, here again, this is me talking to tomorrow's stuff. We're going to see more. But what happens over here in a case like that is it appears that only that which grows after the Avodah Zarah designation in fact becomes Aser as Avodah Zarah. So if a person worships an Asher, she was planted for stamp purposes, a person worships it, only that which grows after the point of Avodah Zarah designation ultimately becomes Avodah Zarah. So that's why the Pasuk says, Hashem Tigadeyun. That in that kind of case, do you have to destroy the tree? No. What do you have to do? You have to cut off whatever grew after the Avodah Zarah designation. I'm assuming you're able to measure that in some way. So also, therefore, it's two different psukim referring to two different cases. And therefore, Rabbi says, from here is a clear raya that even a tree initially planted for mundane purposes and subsequently worshipped as Avodah Zarah will in fact be asr. So the Gemara says, sorry. So, so what is the case ultimately again of the tree, where the primary part is mutter, and only that which is cut off or that which grows afterwards is going to be mutter. So the Gemara says, I have a Hashem Tizafun Ba'ish Kanasaba, Tamuda, to which the Gemara said, but 1 second, but we're talking about the Gemara is bringing the Pasuk. The Gemara is bringing the Pasuk, Hashem Tizafun Ba'ish, Rashi is right across. Hashem Tizafun Ba'ish Nasi, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Tamuda, and they'll say, well, the Mesa even Shnaku Basaf Abdu. So the Gemara,